This random boy awakened a cooking talent but used it to dominate the apocalypse. Not only was he extremely skilled with any knife, but his food could also buff and strengthen anyone to a superhuman level. The entire army was discouraged and thinking of giving up, but once they ate, everyone became motivated and rushed back to work, all thanks to the dishes the protagonist had cooked. He alone managed everything and was about to get rid of mandatory military service. But one day when he opened a door, he came face to face with a monster devouring his friend. One of them threw hot oil, but it was useless and ended up dying. Seeing a weak point, the protagonist managed to eliminate the monster and awaken his talents. And the system announced an event of capture the flag in Sector Rock 17. He decides to ignore this and goes in search of survivors, but everyone is dead. Sometime later, he approaches an ammunition warehouse but is ambushed by a creature, and that's when the ingredient analysis talent activates. The beast continues to charge furiously at the protagonist, but now the boy thinks he can defend himself. The beast screams like never before in its life. He unlocked the novice dagger skill by killing the monster. Shin emerges covered in blood and knows that if the message hadn't appeared, he would have died right there. He feels something strange, and the boss eye skill makes it so there are no ingredients he can't handle. Shin is confused. Is the system really considering a monster as an ingredient? Suddenly a soldier appears, and together they head to another base where everyone seems exhausted. Soon after, he is called to a meeting with one of the corrupt lieutenants. Half of the surviving soldiers were not of high rank, and only the mentally stable attended. The transport unit has 10 members, the reconnaissance unit 7, and the cooking unit only Shin. About 100 people survived, half of the total. Min-jae explains that they lost contact with the world, all communications failed. The lieutenant goes into despair, and a soldier suggests an attack from North Korea, but there is protection against that. Everyone fears death and worries about their families. Without communication, they await orders from the commander, the only officer present, but he remains silent. Unable to act, the soldiers panic, and tension rises. Some argue while others try to calm them down. The lieutenant decides to send soldiers to the upper unit for orders, but Shin warns about the danger of the 2-hour journey through mountainous terrain. Ignoring the warning, the officer insists on using volunteers. Everyone becomes apprehensive, realizing that the lieutenant fears taking responsibility and tries to absolve himself. Even disappointed, Shin remains silent. With no alternatives, the lieutenant orders the others to stay at the base until further contact and asks for information about the remaining supplies. While the protagonist thinks he expected more from this guy, he was being very foolish. Young-jun informs that there is food for 6 weeks or up to 2 months with fewer people. There is enough ammunition but no resupply. They discuss how to deal with monsters, energy, and water while waiting for contact from the upper unit. The atmosphere calms down a bit until the lieutenant dismisses everyone to plan the next actions. Shin, irritated, questions the silence about the awakening. Realizing he is the only one with special skills, he decides to prove it. He grabs his kitchen knife and thinks about the feeling of cutting vegetables and slices the wooden table in front of him. Everyone is shocked, and he explains that he awakened after killing a monster in the kitchen. The lieutenant is skeptical, but Shin insists he also doubted at first. Despite the fear and uncertainty, he promises to protect and feed everyone, suggesting that the unit's mission should be to awaken each member. Before they can react, a soldier warns that 5 monsters are approaching. The lieutenant orders everyone back to their positions. Shin runs, scared by this many attacks, while outside the soldiers fight, spending almost an entire magazine to take down each creature. Even though they still have plenty of ammunition stored, soon the unit will reach its limit. After the attack, the officer praises the troops and orders each group to count their men. 2 soldiers died and will be buried next to the base. The battle ends, and the decisions from the meeting begin to be implemented. 2 volunteers leave with ammunition to try to contact the upper unit under the lieutenant's cover, while the rest organize defenses and ration supplies. They wonder why they didn't awaken, and Shin imagines it's because they weren't close enough. Unlike when he killed the beast in this, he shares details about the creature's weak points, armpits, and vulnerability to heat, and the lieutenant orders that bayonets be sharpened for use in close combat. Tae-jun, the group's strategist, supports the idea and helps formulate plans. Before the next fight, Shin invites him to eat, reminding him that they need to keep their energy up. Back in the kitchen, he realizes how much his cooking skills have improved since the awakening. He prepares a perfectly fried pork belly, controlling the temperature with almost supernatural precision. The dish temporarily boosts the soldiers' strength and agility, also raising the team's morale. Shin notices that the prepared dish grants a mysterious status increase, and the system instructs him to use the chef's special sauce. An energy surges in his hand, allowing him to control emotions through food with the soldiers in a panic. He uses the ability to calm them down and serve dinner after eating. Everyone reports feeling revitalized and thanks him, asking for more servings. Curious, Shin realizes that the effect could indeed help maintain the group's morale. Suddenly, a new attack occurs, interrupting the meal. Rushing to the barracks, they discover two monsters still alive following Shin's plan. A soldier approaches to finish off the monster with the bayonet, until he finally takes it down and awakens as an electric mage. Surprised by the floating window that appears, the young man demonstrates his powers, confirming the success of the experiment and proving that the awakening is real. Shin watches in fascination, happy to have helped the unit's first awakening. Everyone celebrates, and then the second soldier approaches, but the mentally ill one stops to reflect on life face to face with the monster and takes a bite that nearly sends him to the Paralympics. However, after fighting and leaving everyone in shock thinking he was going to die, he finally finishes the creature and manages to awaken as an astronomer. Unfortunately, other captains were refusing to attempt awakening due to the last incident. Some tried to pressure the captain, saying that the leader they needed had to be an awakened one, but he still seemed scared. A little later, the protagonist talks to one of the awakened in a shed, who warns that they couldn't have a cowardly and unawakened leader like that. But our boy tells him to relax, that he would take care of it shortly after. He went to the kitchen and prepared the perfect dish to motivate the captain and took the opportunity to talk to him. The captain now seemed like a different person. Completely motivated, everyone said it was crazy for him to fight, but he told them not to worry. With that, he confronted the semi-dead monster, and even without using any kind of bladed weapon, he punched, blocked, and even bit the creature, finally finishing it off, leaving everyone in shock, celebrating that this was the most insane fight they had ever seen, but the officer's expression still seemed far from friendly for a warm reception. Despite this, he thanked Sergeant Shin, but Hyung becomes scared again of the officer. And, in light of all this, our hero thinks he will try to be more careful the next time he cooks. Inevitably, the protagonist is questioned about what he did to the officer to make him so different from before, and in response, Shin says he just gave him something to eat and talked, which impresses Hyung with the boy's persuasive skills. In any case, the hero says that's how the human heart works. Then Hyung questions whether it will be that easy to convince others every time, and Shin simply smiles, saying that no one can ignore the power of listening. Obviously, the boy still isn't convinced by this explanation, and the hero himself knows it doesn't make any sense. That's because everything happened thanks to his ability, and he still couldn't reveal his power. After all, this time was different from when he demonstrated strength with a kitchen knife. And after everyone saw Kwang in that frightening way, it makes sense to say he had a temporary personality change. Thus, the hero's ability could prove quite dangerous if used incorrectly. Changing the subject, the protagonist believes that a young man as kind as him being a berserk could be a bad thing. However, Hyung disagrees, as at this moment, everyone's survival is at stake. In any case, Shin asks his colleague to send all the awakened to the kitchen later so he can prepare a good dish, but Hyung questions whether they can do that because the battalion doesn't have much food left. Then, our hero explains that more than half of what remains is preserved food for emergencies, and that's why everything that is fresh should be consumed soon before it spoils. Moreover, the sergeant himself is already counting the days until he can eat a good meal. However, Shin is really worried if he will be able to use his skills on the emergency rations, which don't have a preparation process. Back at the barracks, one of the beasts runs wildly while being chased. The military is trying to corner the monster into a corner of the base. And despite there being some exceptions, overall for Shin, the awakened ones are doing very well. Although, at this moment, one of the beasts that would serve as a sacrifice is killed, and Hyung starts to argue quite a bit with his unit. This ends up slightly changing our hero's previous thought that everyone was working well. At this moment, the biggest problem is that it's not easy to get the monster close enough for someone to deliver the final blow. That's because the monsters have a lot of resilience, and most will become increasingly enraged until death. In this context, the awakening must be done safely, and the brigade cannot rush too much. Later, the military rushes because they heard that the sergeant caught one of the monsters. And naturally, Hyung gets excited because finally, someone is doing the job correctly. And upon arriving there, the soldier really prepared the perfect offering for an awakening. With that, Hyung says that now they just need someone to finish it off. Thus, as the next on the list to be awakened, Mr. Hyuk from the transport unit is called, and at that very moment, he accepts his superior's order without even complaining. Hyung asks if the boy is confident and advises him to aim for the monster's armpit. Then, having trained quite a bit for this moment, Hyuk delivers just one blow that kills the beast instantly. At this moment, the same blue panel from before appears for the boy, and very excited, he announces that he has achieved the sniper class. With this, the number of awakened among the military is now 5, and Shin asks if the class is like a sniper, and at that moment, several other windows start to appear, leaving the soldier worried. Quickly, he informs the sergeant about everything that is happening and a strange phrase that just appeared. But this phrase was about faction formation, which has also appeared for all the other awakened so far. Since 5 is the minimum number to form a group, our hero now has the first faction in the Rock 17 region. But Shin obviously still doesn't understand anything that the messages are saying. As soon as Hyuk managed to awaken, the same window appeared for all players. And an achievement also appeared congratulating the faction formation, which was faster than most. Because they reached 3rd place, a reward of 10 growth elixirs was given, and this elixir can, for a short period, increase a person's experience gain by 500. Returning to reality, the soldiers question what they will do now, so Shin asks all the awakened to gather. Later, in an emergency meeting, Hyuk comments that this whole situation is increasingly resembling a game, and Hyuk agrees, recalling that apparently the condition for forming a group is to have 5 awakened. At this moment, our hero thinks about the previous message because, if it is indeed correct, they can advance quickly if they use the elixir. However, Kwang is more concerned about the fact that they were the 3rd group formed and not the 2nd or the 1st. In the end, this means that there are monsters outside the region, so inevitably, the issue of the safety of their families comes back to be discussed. But as the military themselves are already in such a bad state, it's hard to imagine the situation on the other side. At this point in the game, most of everyone's families have probably been eliminated by the monsters. Therefore, our hero advises them not to think about this in such a pessimistic way. He is also worried about the situation outside, but at this moment, the safety of the group is a priority. Hyuk, for his part, tries to argue, but Shin shouts, reminding them that they are ahead of the others in this game and that they should focus on that now. So, although he is not very happy, Hyuk agrees with our hero. After all, they will only be able to find and save their families if they stay alive in any case. Kwang reminds them that, despite having 100 surviving soldiers, the faction consists of only 5 people. This makes the soldiers think that only the awakened count, and Shin thinks that the boy is not wrong now that the world has changed suddenly. If a person is not awakened, they don't even count as a human being. By the way, Hyuk recalled that Hyuk achieved the sniper class and commented that it must have been granted by the boy's innate abilities. As for the class trait, he states that accuracy and firing power are enhanced at the moment of the shot. Thus, Hyuk is impressed but also worried about the day when they will no longer have ammunition, but the boy smiles, telling the officer not to worry about that because, if a normal soldier needs 10 shots to kill a beast, he only needs 2. In light of this, our hero is quite happy because, with this ability, they will be able to defeat monsters much more easily. So now Hyuk becomes responsible for mastering the monsters, and unfortunately, that's the only good news. Shin feels quite relieved that the unit will be able to relax a bit more than usual, but there's still no time to sit and feel discouraged, because to survive, they must advance naturally. The soldiers need to continue waking the others, and fortunately, most of them are willing to do so, although some others are still refusing and trembling with fear. However, when this happens, our hero intervenes, and, with a few minutes outside, the soldiers' personalities change completely. Every time this happened, Hyuk became even more suspicious because everyone exhibited the same impulsive behavior. With that, the time came when the boy could no longer hold back and decided to question Shin. Already very stressed, Hyuk shouts that our hero is hiding something because whenever the soldiers are taken to talk, they come back different. The boy was indeed not wrong, so, having been discovered, the protagonist revealed everything, saying it was for the good of the battalion. And fortunately, Hyuk understood, thus focusing on waking the troops while the protagonist focused on cooking. While cooking, suddenly the system appeared showing our hero a total of 82 accumulated points. Shin in turn thought that points were accumulated when hunting monsters or cooking well. Generally in games, points are used to buy items in the shop, so the boy thinks there must be something like that here, and after poking around a bit, the hero really finds and opens the system's point shop with that. The boy's theory is confirmed, and he obviously decides to take a look. Among the available items was a combat axe, as well as a knife and a rye bread. Mostly, the available items were just things related to the combat class, and the only thing the hero could use at that moment was the rye bread. Additionally, there are also potions that increase some specific stats, but they are very expensive. Thus, the protagonist decides to check the shop again later, because those potions seem to be something important. At this moment, the boy is using the chef's special sauce and the chef's eye, along with novice dagger proficiency. The last skill allows a person to naturally master combat stances using a dagger, and while training with Kwang, the hero was quite satisfied. So far, the boy hasn't tried to fight with his fists or swords, but at least he is good with the kitchen knife. In any case, in the event that this skill is only novice level, Shin wonders how good a master level one would be. Moreover, the hero also gained beginner flame affinity by accidentally grabbing a hot pan. Now the boy can hold flames in his hand for 3 or 4 seconds, which could become something even better with practice. Last but not least, the beginner culinary proficiency. In a conversation with Hyung, the boy explained that the meals had an energizing taste and that the stats in his status increased, although no one seemed to notice. This probably happened because the normal soldiers still didn't have the status window. Additionally, the effects of the eaten dishes do not appear as a system message. The system does not comment on the effects of the meal, but if it did, the one responsible for it would be exposed immediately in any case. The hero asks how the boy feels, and Hyung explains that he feels much stronger, as his strength increased by 30. Thus, the protagonist understands that the buffs are working, and if Hyung is telling the truth, Shin's abilities are definitely not below average. However, he is still thinking of a way to give the same boost to the entire battalion. At that moment, a soldier appears desperate, demanding the sergeant's presence. And very out of breath, he explains that a new type of monster has appeared above the armory, but that was a monster completely different from the armored lizards before. Upon reaching the top of the barracks building, the soldier introduces himself, and Hyung goes straight to the point of where the monster is. Thus, the soldier explains that he was monitoring the area, and something he had never seen before caught his attention. The appearance is completely different from what they have seen so far. And for that reason, the boy hands a pair of binoculars to the officer in our hero's view. The soldier seems quite scared, and upon indicating the location, the two officers begin to search for the monster. Hyung in turn questions whether the protagonist is seeing something, but he replies that he isn't until he ends up finding something very different. After searching for a bit, Shin finally manages to see the different monster among the normals. And at the moment their gazes meet, Shin becomes worried because the beast is coming in the direction of the barracks. It is said that this beast can reach up to 3 meters, in addition to having others by its side, possibly being the leader. Our hero agrees that the situation is strange, because lizards usually attack in groups of at most 2. So it becomes clear that this larger one came from somewhere else, and with 20 smaller ones by its side, the potential danger is enormous. In light of this, Hyung states that they will have to use a lot of bullets, but that is definitely not the biggest problem. The battalion is outnumbered, but they know the weaknesses of the monsters. However, there is still something very wrong with this story. Getting straight to the point, the hero asks when the beast appeared, and he explains that it was this morning. So far the beast's behavior has been nothing abnormal, and it has remained still around the perimeter. In this case, Hyung suggests that the monsters are scared, and Shin cannot understand why they are not attacking even with such a large group. But after thinking for a bit, the hero concludes that they must be waiting for an opening. Shin says that the monsters know a normal net won't work, and that's why they are standing around the base. In light of this, the two awakened ones become quite scared, and Hayek questions whether these beasts are really intelligent. Then our hero recalls that wolves are already very intelligent, and these beasts, which are bipedal, must be even more so. Kwang agrees with the sergeant, and he suggests that they attack first, which obviously surprises everyone. But Shin quickly dismisses this possibility because they only have the advantage inside the base, and in fact, they can't even go out, as the most important thing now is to focus on the monster's movements and create a strategy. With that, Hyung warns that he will inform the company commander, and Shin asks the boy to tell the men to be careful once the news spreads. The troops will become scared, and this fear of an unknown enemy needs to be calmed. Thus, our hero returns to the kitchen to put his special chef sauce on the meals. While they eat, two soldiers comment relief that, at least, the troop is in a safe place with better chances of survival. And then, the protagonist finishes preparing some special dishes, like the kimchi octopus. With that, a soldier comments that it was a bit scary at first, but now that he has gotten used to it, he feels more relaxed. In addition to the octopus dish, the protagonist also prepared pork with vegetables. And back to the previous soldier, he states that he is worried about his family, but since he survived, he believes the others did too. Somehow, the morale of the soldiers remained high, so the defense did not slip. Now, the total number of awakened ones is about 20, almost half of an entire battalion. Later, the protagonist comments that nothing has changed so far, and the previous soldier confirms, as the beast has not left the perimeter. However, now the number of monsters is twice as many as the first time they were spotted. In this case, the soldier becomes a bit worried about the possibility of the number continuing to increase, but Shin reminds him that the number of awakened ones is also higher. And of those 23 of them are snipers who can hit their targets accurately even from afar and with not so good rifles. Thus, in the event they counterattack, Shin believes they won't lose, and that if they keep creating awakened ones, everything will become easier. In the storage room, the hero realizes that they will have to start using the rations next week and will have at least half of the people as awakened at this moment. The troops should be running desperately. If it weren't for the buffs from the meals, then Shin starts jotting down some things he will need for the storage, until suddenly, he hears a noise and the lights in the hall go out due to a power outage. Naturally, the hero becomes scared because the maintenance team said the generators were working fine, and soon he questions whether this outage managed to affect the entire base. However, quickly, the boy thinks that this could be a planned move by the monsters. And if that is the case, they are indeed in trouble. Without wasting time, the protagonist runs out, knowing that the base is in a very dangerous situation. Initially, Shin said that a sniper could handle this, but the story changes when there is no field of vision. Therefore, without the power generator, the snipers become completely useless. In another area of the military base, the lieutenant orders everyone to their positions and the snipers to the roof. The rest of the awakened, in turn, must focus on their assigned tasks. Quickly, a soldier informs that all troops are gathered in the ammunition depot, so the lieutenant orders to seal the entrance. And with that, the gates are closed and locked. At this moment, the situation is that they are almost finishing the placement of the soldiers, and fortunately the military still has some flares. Thus, Shin states that the monsters are not infinite, but they must also end the battle. Quickly changing the subject, Shin asks where the awakened are, and Hyung explains that he organized them around the snipers. The mages are divided between offensive and defensive, while the warriors take protective positions. Moreover, everyone's morale is high due to the buffs from the meals provided by the sergeant. Therefore, Hyung asks where our protagonist will stay, and Shin shows his knife. Obviously, the boy questions this decision of the hero to go to the front line, but Shin reminds him that he is the first awakened and it's not like the officer could stop the protagonist at this moment. A strong wind begins along with a tremor in the ground. And upon looking closely, everyone realizes that the monsters are approaching the base with a flash from the flares. All the military personnel begin to prepare, and the lieutenant is startled when he looks through the binoculars. This is because the horde of monsters is getting closer to the base. With that, Hyung asks the captain to give the order, and the lieutenant commands all troops to open fire on the beasts. Dozens or hundreds of shots are fired, and while some beasts are defeated, others continue to advance. In any case, the meals our hero prepared are working as expected. But the moment the flares stop working, they will be in trouble amidst the monsters. Suddenly the boss appears, and being the most dangerous of them, the focus of the snipers shifts to him quickly. Aides deliver more ammunition to the awakened, and Hyuk asserts that he will defeat him. Then, at that moment, the protagonist begins to unintentionally use the boss eye skill. And the system informs that the boss of the lizards is the rarest and strongest of the pack, and that no other compares or dares to challenge his decisions. This boss is also too fast and is dodging every bullet that is fired. With that, the hero understands that they are not of the same species after all, but for Shin, it doesn't matter how strong he is, because it's foolish to be at the front line as a commander. After all, this attitude only makes the boss a giant target for the awakened. But with a very loud roar, the beast begins to influence the other monsters and the scream reaches the base, causing great discomfort in the ears of the troops. Then, the system informs that the military has been exposed to a powerful war cry. And because of that, the strength as well as the speed and health of all the lizards increased for a moment. Not only that, all the geckos also received resistance to bullets. And, in contrast, all neighboring creatures that are not geckos received confusion and unfocused effects. In light of this, Hyung becomes very frightened and asks the protagonist what is happening. And at that moment, noticing the state of the troops, Shin understands that they are indeed in a dangerous situation. Quickly, the soldiers alert the lieutenant, and he is incredulous that there is a skill capable of causing so many negative effects, but without even having time to think. Some of the normal monsters begin to advance much more aggressively. Hyuk, for his part, remains on the roof with a severe headache and realizes that the effects are exactly as the system said. At this moment, all defenses are falling, and because of that, Hyung shouts, questioning what his colleagues are doing. Then, with a desperate shout, he orders everyone to group up and keep shooting amidst all that chaos. Our hero is with the front line responsible for subduing the monsters. In his mind, the hero thinks that the shooting frequency has dropped significantly and that this probably happened because of the boss debuff. The bullets are no longer working, so all ammunition is delivered to the awakened. Hyung, for his part, questions why the monster didn't use this power before. Then, Shin recalls that the message said the effect is temporary, and therefore the boss must have waited for the right moment. In the end, that beast was capable of not only thinking intelligently, but also devising a plan. In any case, our hero asks his colleague to gather all the awakened. For Shin, there is no longer any sense in attacking from a distance, and therefore, everyone needs to prepare for close combat. After explaining his plan, each awakened soldier receives a treat, and since no one understands anything yet, our hero decides to tell the whole truth. It is a fact that some of them may have already guessed, but Shin's abilities can enhance those of others. The hero recalls that everyone has already experienced eating something he prepared before awakening, and that's why now the food is not only better but also gives some special effects to those who eat it. Shin didn't know what the monsters would do, so he prepared and explained that each treat contained a specific buff. In this case, Hyung says there's nothing to fear because, if the training is followed, the unit may have a chance, and thus, the military will ensure their stay at the base and the survival of the group. So far, the entire battalion has been reinforced, and Kwang is responsible for the boss monster, which, after eating his high-quality treat, he didn't even question a bit. Back on the roof, Hyuk questions once again what everyone is doing, as he can no longer hold back the advance of the monsters. But downstairs in the barracks, the awakened were preparing precisely for this advance of the beasts. With that, the increased attack effect is applied, and all the beasts leap over the unit's barricades. The lieutenant becomes desperate, but now the awakened are ready for combat, and with just one punch, Kwang manages to throw one of the monsters far away. Despite being attacked by another, he doesn't get cornered, and with everyone fighting at the same time, a great confrontation begins. As the fight unfolds, Hyung gives some commands and tells the soldiers not to spread out. However, one of the awakened is pushed to the corner. But at the moment he was about to be finished off, the protagonist appears with his kitchen knife, and with just one cut, he finishes off the monster that was causing problems. Naturally, our hero will have to deal with the beasts as well, but the boss buff made the lizards very strong. That's why Shin knows he won't be able to face it alone, even if it were a high-level boss. But upon consuming a courage chocolate cookie made by himself, Shin's stats skyrocket. All attributes, without exception, were increased for a whole day, and the effect of the chef's special sauce applied a courage effect. Now the normal lizards are no longer a threat, and the soldiers with the courage effect will dictate the rules of the battlefield. Moreover, hostile targets will have their stats and morale reduced, and while the boss advances wildly, the system warns that this will make allies unlock new traits. The first to feel these effects is Kwang, whose confusion debuffs are neutralized by courage and feeling better. The boy already shouts for his comrades to follow him, because an honorable battle awaits them. The monsters begin to cluster towards the entrance, and all the troops head for the gate. Kwang is responsible for clearing the way, but he doesn't care about the danger and runs towards the boss monster. Then, at the moment they meet, the two clash with powerful punches from a distance, Hyung laughs while commenting that this feeling is incredible. He questions what Shin did for their stats to be so high, but our hero doesn't have time to chat because he is busy killing monsters. In any case, Hyung warns that with these buffs, they have already surpassed the enemies and that now it's just a matter of time before they win. But Shin makes it clear that no one should let their guard down yet, as they need to hold the lizards while Kwang dominates the leader. With that, the hero orders Hyung to provide long-distance support, and the two advance into combat. Another awakened uses shield power to defend, and the snipers continue to shoot. Meanwhile, Hyung uses a thunder spear skill to attack, and our hero uses his kitchen cleaver. However, the hero soon remembers Kwang, who continues alone in a direct confrontation against the boss. Although the blows are having an effect, the monster's resistance is much greater than the others, and because of that, the beast manages to wrap its tail around the officer's neck and throw him away. However, at the moment it was about to finish off the soldier, one of the awakened appears to help, and soon another one appears to join forces, so, with a bold move, they manage to take down the beast. With that, it's Kwang's time to shine, and, without wasting any time, he runs forward, jumping towards the boss and landing a powerful punch that makes the monster scream in pain. Then, the officer continues to attack relentlessly, even going so far as to bite the beast and tear off a piece. And with great brutality, Kwang finally manages to finish off the boss of the monsters, who are already, for the most part, defeated. With that, our hero orders everyone to stay on guard and commands the senior officers to confirm the status of the unit members. Then, with much relief, the soldiers begin to celebrate and smile, but Shin still seems quite incredulous. Even in a situation where the soldiers' firearms were neutralized, they managed to win. Suddenly, the system appears congratulating Shin for taking control of Area Rock 27, and informing that the group has evolved to a provisional designation called Battalion 423. The battle status of the global event also appears, but the values were still hidden. Obviously, no one understood what this meant, so the system warned that this group was the first to occupy a large area, and with all this on the table, our hero could only laugh and celebrate taking first place. With the end of that great conflict between humans and monsters, a great despair began. This was because there were many injured and a huge line was forming at the infirmary. With much commotion, the most seriously injured are sent to stretchers, and Mr. Park is tasked with bringing the patients. After the battle, the busiest people were the awakened with healing powers. Fortunately, the healers and regular doctors were able to handle the situation. And, after the awakened used their healing powers, all the pain of the soldiers goes away. With that, Hyung is pleased with the progress of the situation and says he believes things are calming down in this case. Our hero thanks his colleague for the good work, but the officer makes it clear that the credit for all this goes to Kwang and Soo-hyuk. After all, at that moment, the two are completely exhausted and unconscious on the stretchers. By the way, the protagonist asks about the battalion commander, but Hyung also claims not to know where he is. In the end, this was already expected for Shin, but he still thinks about how disappointing it is. Later, our hero asks how far the area they will be able to protect is, and the boy says it's up to the mountain range. The reason Hyung said this was because the system informed that they took control of the ridge. At the moment, the soldiers are located at the highest peak of the mountain range, and besides them, the only forces were the lizards. However, the officer wonders if this had anything to do with who was occupying the most iconic location, and if Hyung is right, the soldiers defended themselves from the lizards in the mountains and were then recognized as occupiers. Consequently, for Shin, this ends up sounding like good news for them. But Hyung continues and recalls that, with the casualties from the previous day, the impact on the lizard group was enormous. Therefore, the officer suggests that, at this moment, the best thing to do is to launch a counterattack to eliminate them as soon as possible. However, Shin made it clear that this would be very difficult. Obviously, Hyung questioned this, but the protagonist reminded him that the battle from the previous day was very tough even with the terrain advantage. For him, there is a big difference between being in a defensive position and having to break one. But once again, the officer questions this decision because now they have incredible powers and even more awakened. However, the protagonist tells the boy not to rely on that meal buff anymore. After all, it required quality ingredients and customized flavors, plus 4 to 7 hours to prepare. In light of this, the officer is surprised that those were not just normal dishes. Moreover, the protagonist had been preparing for the invasion for a long time, but now replicating something like that would be impossible. Thus, Hyung thinks for a moment and says they will have to plan these matters later. Changing the subject, the officer shouts to the soldiers that, when they finish the job, they should unload the next truck. After the fight, many monster bodies were left, and it is not possible to burn or bury them all. By the way, the protagonist asks if Hyung has already looked into the advantages of the system. This is because Shin has already analyzed all the options but still doesn't know which one to choose in this case. Hyung smiles and says that the protagonist should choose any of them. Although it seems like something important, no one has any information about the benefits yet. Moreover, Hyung says that both he and the others will feel more comfortable with the hero choosing first, and Shin knows that they can't even ask the commander now because he is not around. In this case, the hero simply decides to choose the MANHWA mobile fortress. In light of this, Hyung questions the decision, and Shin explains that the name suggests its purpose. The protagonist believes that this benefit will likely grant something like a tank, and even though they don't need something like that right now, they will soon because eventually the group will run out of food. Shin, for his part, still doesn't know exactly what it is, but it should help anyway. Then Hyung is convinced by this explanation and decides to make the same choice as the protagonist. With that, the protagonist selects the benefit of the MANHWA mobile fortress and chooses the power to summon. Thus, with a golden aura surrounding him, the hero summons the mobile fortress, but after waiting a bit, the system warns that there is not enough space for the summoning in that location. In light of this, Hyung is very surprised, and Shin suggests that it must be because of the number of bodies on the ground. Therefore, the two decide to go to a more open place to test the new power. And before leaving, Hyung orders the soldiers to finish the rest of the work. Then, as they headed to the location, all Shin could think about was how big it could be. In the end, it got late, and no place they went had enough space to summon the fortress. Obviously, the hero is frustrated for not being able to test his power, but at least he gained some experience. It is said that the hero gains 1 experience point every time someone eats a dish with enhancement. In this case, the boy thinks that everything seems to be going very well. Shin is getting stronger, and the awakening of the troops is happening more and more. At this moment, however, someone knocks on the boy's door, and upon entering, the hero realizes it is Lieutenant Kim. Seeing this, Shin quickly stands up to greet the lieutenant with the proper respect of the hierarchy, and after informing that he is resting at the moment, Kim looks at the hero, smiling. Without wasting time, the lieutenant approaches and praises the protagonist for his good work. Then, Kim continues to flatter the hero, but Shin thinks he doesn't need compliments, especially from someone who can't do the obvious and who, even when speaking well, always hides at the most important moment. Back to the flattery, the lieutenant thanks God that everyone is well and warns that there is still no good news. In light of this, the hero asks what happened to the 2 soldiers who were sent to the upper units, but, quite casually, Kim just sits down and says that they probably won't come back. Shin, for his part, grits his teeth in anger because it could have been him chosen to go on that mission. By the way, Kim comments that he heard they will have to close the cafeteria and eat combat rations, and the hero confirms the rumor. In this case, the lieutenant asks if they can't just eat real food, and the protagonist apologizes but warns that they are currently going through difficulties and need to save. Anyway, Kim reminds him that he is the only boss in the place, and that, at the moment of encouraging the awakening, Shin didn't spare food. However, it wasn't as if the protagonist wanted to do that. This is because that was a special treatment to help the soldiers face the danger of the awakening process. In this case, Kim questions what those who have already awakened ate last time, and Shin tries to explain about the effects of the food. Obviously, the lieutenant doesn't believe it, and there is really nothing the hero can do about it, for it is true that Kim is the only remaining high-ranking officer in the battalion. Moreover, if there is anything left of the soldiers in the outside world, Kim will be someone who, unfortunately, will become important in the future, and Shin has no choice but to endure and comply with his wishes. However, because the hero is unwilling, the lieutenant gets irritated and shouts that he will eat the damn rations. Even against his will, Kim accepts to let this matter pass. Given that the battalion situation is really not good with that, the lieutenant leaves the room and slams the door hard, making a lot of noise. And even though he has never smoked a cigarette in his life, all this stress made Shin consider lighting one. Since the mountains became the soldiers' territory, monster attacks have been reduced by half. And in the hospital, the protagonist reports everything that has happened so far to Hyuk, who got injured during the awakening despite having heard about it before. He thanks the protagonist for doing the hard work, but Shin says that everyone worked on it. Changing the subject, the hero asks if there is no treatment for Hyuk's leg, and the boy informs him that, due to the delay, there isn't. Unfortunately, he is still in good health even though he has difficulties walking. But that doesn't stop the hero from feeling guilty about what happened to the boy for him. If only he hadn't asked to awaken back then, everything could have turned out differently. However, Hyuk notices this feeling from the hero and makes it clear that he holds no resentment because if they hadn't tried so hard to awaken, they would have already been devoured by monsters, and this injury was just a consequence of the process. For the soldiers, the protagonist is the reason everyone is still there. And for that, he asks the hero not to carry all the guilt alone. This whole speech moves the cook, and the boy calls Shin to step out of the building for a bit outside. Hyuk informs that his job is that of an astronomer, and obviously Shin doesn't understand what that means. In response, the boy comments that it's something like reading the constellations of the stars to predict certain events. He even manages to predict the future by reading horoscopes or something like that. In the end, the protagonist gets excited and understands this ability as a human radar. Apparently, the job has nothing to do with actual combat, but he can detect danger before a confrontation, and because it's something very useful for planning strategies, Hyuk decided to see our hero. This is because the boy managed to discover two things, and one of them is that the battalion will receive some visitors tomorrow. At that moment, Shin already understands what that means, so Hyuk says it's better for the cook to hide his claws the next morning. Some people approach, surprised to find a military base in the area. With that, they shout that there must be soldiers in the place, and because of that, a mother believes they can now survive. Without wasting time, everyone runs towards the military base, which for some unknown reason is wide open. Earlier that same day, the soldiers were commenting from the top of the building that the visitors should arrive in an hour on the morning of the 11th day after being attacked. The hero and the officer spot a human climbing the mountain. Hyuk, in turn, raises the issue that civilians are ignoring the signs prohibiting entry into military areas. That said, he questions what they should do, as they probably have nowhere to go. Then Shin says the battalion will shelter them. Obviously, the officer doesn't think this is the best option. But he doesn't question it, and before the visitors arrive, the hero wonders if these are the people Tae-jun was talking about. An hour later, in the courtyard of the military base, one of the soldiers orders the civilians to calm down and form a single line. Then another soldier comes by, this time with a clipboard for the civilians to identify themselves. And finally, water is distributed among the refugees. After counting, Hyuk informs that there are 25 of them, of all ages and genders for now. Hyuk thinks it's better for the military to move to the second floor to leave the third for the visitors. Additionally, he suggests increasing the night patrols, and Shin smiles, saying they will start by cleaning the second floor in the background. The lieutenant greets the soldier who took the first impressions of the refugees. Shin questions if he is not the commander, and Hyuk confirms that he is here to play the executive's game. Kim, in turn, introduces himself as the commander of the unit and tries to calm the people with nice words. With that, the civilians get a bit excited because they had thought the place only had regular soldiers. Changing the subject, everyone wants to know the situation of the troops, as well as if there is anything to eat, and in response, the lieutenant shouts that they will prepare everything as soon as the paperwork is filled out. Then he orders the nearest soldier to take care of everything as quickly as possible. In light of this, Hyuk calls the hero to go over there for a conversation. Upon introducing themselves, Kim explains that the two are the highest in rank besides him and second-in-command. Without wasting time, Kim asks if there is space for everyone in the rooms, and the boy explains that there is. In that case, the lieutenant says he will let Hyuk take charge and guide them. Additionally, he informs that he will talk to the boy later and asks to report any problems immediately. Now, for the protagonist, since everyone is starving, he asks the hero to add 25 extra portions, what, despite being madness, neither of them can deny. In the end, increasing the number of meals to a quarter of the original number cannot end well. But for the civilians, now they are safe, and all of this is thanks to the lieutenant's management. In light of this, Hyuk is very irritated by the officer's smile. But Shin calms him down because all they can do is obey him. That's because when the soldiers tried to lead, they were not heard. However, now that Kim is at the base, everyone is following him, which indicates that the refugees care a lot about ranks. With pretty words and fake smiles, the civilians are falling more and more for the charlatan's talk, and although the lieutenant is not a good officer, Hyuk admits that he is good with words. Getting straight to the main point, Shin decides to go to the cafeteria as soon as possible, and Hyuk releases some soldiers to go along. Later, the refugees climb the building staircase to their new resting place. However, an elderly man complains about being on the third floor and having to climb all those stairs. But Kwang soon appears to explain that, In an invasion, the first floor is the most dangerous. And that's why the civilians are above. In any case, the elderly man continues to complain, saying that he is not comfortable there. But others are already happy just to be able to take a shower. Before anything else, it is announced that there is no hot water. And despite a girl complaining, the civilians are aware that they are not in a hotel. Later, it is time to eat, and after sitting in the cafeteria and tasting Shin's dish, many compliments are heard. One even claims that he never thought steamed rice could be so delicious. In light of this, the hero is still a bit surprised that everything happened so suddenly, but he is happy that they are enjoying it. However, the hero remains concerned about the ingredients, as soon they will have to rely on emergency rations, and at this rate, everyone will be out of supplies in just over a month. Breaking these heavy thoughts, someone appears to compliment the meal. Shin thanks for the compliment, but the blonde does not fail to mention the boy's talent and ask what he does for a living. However, this question seems quite strange to ask a soldier. Our hero was about to say boss, but he held back and stated that he is a university student. With that, the three thank him and leave, and Shin continues to think about this unexpected question about his job. Currently, jobs are no longer what they used to be, becoming something much more exclusive. They are the ones that appear in the status window that only the awakened can see. And surely, if other awakened ones heard this question, they would have simply said warrior or healer. So, the hero thought again if that was actually what Taijun was talking about. As he walked through the floor, Hyung did not seem very happy because now, in addition to worrying about the monsters, they still needed to take care of the survivors. Outside the building, a soldier asks how they got into this mess, and the other says he can't even rest. Back to the first, he states that he can no longer do this, and one of them claims that the lieutenant only made things worse. In this case, the soldier says he prefers those sergeants to be in charge, because they have already proven to be much better than Kim. The others agree because there is already a sense of camaraderie among them, and in the background, Hyung heard all this conversation. Later, the soldiers go personally to give their opinions about the lieutenant to the sergeant. Recalling all of Kim's cowardice, however, one of them recalls that the lieutenant has a high level of security, and that they cannot do anything about it. Still, the first soldier warns that they are fighting a war against monsters, and that a commander like that will only hinder them. That said, the soldier asks the sergeant's opinion. And even without answering in his mind, the boy agreed with everything. Hyung has always felt uncomfortable with the lieutenant around because he knows that he would not fight alongside the battalion, and obviously no one follows a commander who simply disappears on the battlefield. It is a fact that if this continues, the morale and unity of the troops will crumble, and for that reason, the sergeant thinks they need to do something about it as soon as possible. Later, everyone gathers at the top of the military building, and many are confused about this secret meeting. Without delay, the sergeant apologizes for bringing everyone there so late, but he does not believe he can wait any longer, seeing all those uncomfortable expressions in the unit. Going straight to the point, Hyung informs that he went to see Lieutenant Kim, and that fact alone is enough to catch everyone's attention. In the end, it was nothing serious, and Hyung merely reported what they felt, asking Kim to join the fight, but, as expected, nothing worked. In response to a polite request, Kim simply stated that he would not be forced to do something ordered by a soldier. With that, a silence takes over the place for a few seconds, and, after thinking for a bit, everyone becomes outraged, concluding that the lieutenant doesn't care about them at all. Even Kim didn't expect such behavior from the tyrant that is Kim. Back to the point, Hyung warns that this is not a matter to be taken lightly, as everyone's survival is at stake. And that is precisely why the sergeant organized this meeting, as the goal now is to get rid of Kim. Obviously, at first, everyone thinks it's crazy to resort to such extremism. Even our hero will question his colleague, as it is clear that they cannot simply dispose of a lieutenant in this case. Hyung asks if the protagonist is not on his side, and how long Shin will continue to be carried by him. In any case, Shin is a bit worried, as, despite everything, Kim remains a high-ranking officer. However, Hyung warns that it is likely that as more survivors join the unit, the group will become larger. Thus, the sergeant questions what will happen if he is always the representative in these meetings. For him, there will come a point when many people will think that the lieutenant is the true leader of the unit. And at that specific moment, the seconds in post will no longer have any autonomy in the battalion. With that, the sergeant shouts, asking if he is wrong because, since Kim has no strength, there is no reason to continue following him obediently. And, after thinking about it, everyone starts to find it unbelievable that they have followed such an incompetent lieutenant for so long. However, they understand that they are still soldiers and cannot simply ignore him because before the crisis he did his part. Hyung, for his part, finds this idea very dangerous, as internal betrayal is a form of modern warfare. Then Hyung agrees and warns that this is precisely why they will have to execute the plan quickly. Not counting Kim, the higher ranks, besides the sergeants, will be Park Tae-jun and Shin Young-jun. Even the regular soldiers will be able to act with commands in the absence of the officers. And for Hyung, all of this will be no problem, as the battalion will be led by Shin. In reality, the reason the sergeant called everyone was that the unit needs to end the lieutenant being caught. However, most of the military still does not accept a cook as a commander, so the boy reminds them that he is the one who feeds them and provides the enhancements. In any case, his second suggestion is the most important because Shin being in command is already a fact. For anyone who has any objections, Hyung shouts to speak up, but Shin can understand the soldiers' distrust. However, at that moment, the military begins to remember that the hero has always been thinking for them and has always comforted them with plenty of food. After reflecting on it, the soldiers understand that they can count on him, as it was due to Shin's buffs that they were able to win the invasion. With that, the sergeant asks if anyone still has any objections, and the hero remains worried. So, with no further manifestations, Hyung elects the protagonist as the new commander. And although Shin does not agree with this, his colleague simply asks him to accept. With the appointment, the system appears stating that all conditions have been met. With more than 30 players and a recognized leader, a clan has been formed, and being the first from the small region and the second from the large region, the group receives a token reward. Then our hero receives the position of leader of Clan 423, and a new job as a rookie chief appears in his status. With that, this is how it will be now. Sergeant Shin will have to lead the entire unit. In this case, the hero thinks that if he is going to do this, he will have to do it right. So, his first suggestion as commander is not to get rid of Lieutenant Kim, which obviously leaves Hyung and Kwang completely confused. In light of this, everyone asks the hero to reconsider his decision, but he asks the military to listen to him first. Shin states that if they start discarding people for their own benefit, they will be alive in body but dead in spirit. So, to maintain their humanity, they should not kill people unless they attack first. And this is something the protagonist asks everyone to promise they will follow, which makes Hyung very proud of the new leadership the battalion will have. Anyway, the soldiers ask why they should keep the lieutenant alive since he won't serve any purpose anymore, and in response, Shin explains that he is just a human being causing problems. But at the moment, discarding him would be a waste because he will definitely still be very useful. And now everyone is even more confused about what the new commander is thinking. Later, from the third floor of the base building, a civilian informs that the military is back. The blonde, in turn, comments to the winds about the fact that they left in a group in the middle of the night. Then the boy asks if there is any problem. But for the blonde, there is still nothing wrong since they are just a bunch of kids in their 20s. However, the captain seems to be strong, even though he is not among the military leading them. Changing the subject, the blonde asks if his colleague checked what he asked, and in response he confirms that yes, and that he found no awakened ones. Another one also took a look, and apparently the soldiers are using weapons to kill the monsters. With that, the blonde concludes that there is a good chance there are no awakened ones and that now is the time to act. Thus, the subordinates of this gang leader ask if they should move now, but, just as a precaution, the man decides to wait a few more days. The next day, many people gather in the cafeteria excited to have a good meal, and Shin analyzes a bit his clan leader token, which can offer a stat bonus depending on the size of the group. The system warns that the hero can choose an object that symbolizes the group to transform it into the token. Providing stat bonuses to all members of a group is a powerful effect. Therefore, Shin thinks it's a shame he doesn't have any good object to represent him. The day before, the hero questioned his position, but Hyung comforted him, reminding him of the soldiers' reactions. Until then, the news that Shin can kill a monster with just a knife had already spread, and the soldiers did not turn against the hero because they knew he was reliable, plus everyone knew they would need a trustworthy leader as an option. They had Kwang, But the soldier's personality was very fluid, swinging between very aggressive and very gentle. And in the end, the only reliable and powerful person left to lead was the protagonist in the kitchen. A soldier salutes the hero, and Shin asks if he told everyone what he requested. In response, the soldier confirms that yes, and that, whenever someone asks about the occupation, they try not to act with suspicion or mention the statuses. Shin also told them to avoid talking about the awakening as much as possible. This is because the best decision is to keep the trunks hidden and use Taijun's hint in the smartest way possible. Anyway, Shin believes this will not stop them from increasing the number of awakened ones, especially since they have the snipers, but the soldier still warns that there is another problem. The military informs that the survivors keep asking to speak with them, and one woman in particular keeps asking for a favor. Shin, in turn, asks if it is something important, but the only thing the soldier knows is that she seems to be the leader of a group of survivors cutting through the rounds. The hero thinks he should be the one to have this conversation with the girl. This is because he is afraid of the lieutenant's reaction. But the hero makes it clear that he will take care of Kim. Thus, Shin asks the soldier not to worry because he already has an idea. But the protagonist decides to take care of the favor first, and for that, he asks for 3 representatives from the survivors additionally. The hero makes it clear that the meeting will take place after dinner, and that nothing can be leaked. Later, Shin makes a wonderful plate of pasta, and it's time to organize things in place. Outside, some soldiers see the commander entering a basement, and as one of them gets confused, the other explains that there is a room under the dining room. It was built to provide hot water and electricity for the dining room, having a boiler and a generator. The soldier, in turn, is sure that this place is being used for something else now, not just a storage. In the basement, Shin thinks that Minji's idea of using this place as a prison was incredible because it is perfect for a cell. And without wasting time, he sets off to deliver the dish to the only prisoner in the place. But upon realizing that Shin is there, the man becomes very confused and surprised. This is because the imprisoned man is Lieutenant Kim, and his cell manager is his former cook. The previous day was when the military went out to put the plan into action. Then, with a sudden entrance into the commander's room, the sergeant activated his electrical powers, thus leaving the lieutenant without even a chance to defend himself before fainting. Back in the present, Kim seems regretful and says he will apologize to all the soldiers he offended. Obviously, the hero does not understand what this means, so he explains that another day he turned the coffee into a radar and blamed the guard. Kim is fully aware that he made a mistake during the inspection, but that was far from the reason for his imprisonment. Shin knows it must be frustrating for the lieutenant to be locked in a cell with nothing to do and not knowing why he is there. But at that moment, Kim begins to vent about other things he remembers doing wrong. Now he knew of his mistakes and therefore asked for Shin's help. But our hero warned that he tried to convince the military, but everyone was very resentful. Thus, Kim understands the situation he is in and begins to come to terms with his fate. At the moment, the lieutenant is in a hopeless situation, which makes him remember more and more all the cases where officers died under his command. However, the hero asks the soldier not to worry because he will continue trying to convince the others and bringing good meals. In light of all this kindness, Kim feels a bit guilty for accepting so much. But since the protagonist even took the trouble to bring his favorite dish, Kim simply thanks him. And after taking the first bite, he enters a state of uncontrollable joy at how delicious it is. While crying, Kim manages to regain a bit of his happiness and feel alive again. Then the protagonist thinks it wasn't a bad idea to bring a meal for him. Thus, Shin hopes the lieutenant can enjoy this happiness a lot. Days ago, Hyung questioned the fact that the hero was cooking lizard meat, and he informed that it was due to a food shortage. In any case, the sergeant asked if this meat was edible, but Shin still didn't know. However, since the boy had nothing better to use as a food source, he started experimenting with new things, and he discovered after trying that the flavor and performance of his dishes are enhanced with the inclusion of magic. With that, the hero finished the dish and earned the title of Pioneer, which is given to those who open new paths in their field. And since this title grants a 100 increase in the effectiveness of abilities, Shin found it interesting to use it on a monster dish with the lieutenant. Later, in the kitchen, the hero finished the rosy lizard dough filled with happiness. And being the first time something like this was cooked, the boy's experience increased. Back in the present, the lieutenant comments that it has been a long time since his last good meal, and that he now feels very well with that. He begins to reflect in a state of immense pleasure until the end of the meal. Shin, for his part, repeated the entire process several times, being happy to feed the lieutenant every day, and even happier that Kim's tongue and brain are getting addicted to his food. After a few days of repeating the process, Shin cut the happy meals and replaced them with battle reasons, which left the lieutenant in a state of near madness for having entered a deep dependency. As expected, the plan worked, and now the hero says it's time to go to work. In the background, Hyung cannot understand what the protagonist is thinking, because he is giving 3 daily meals to the lieutenant. Thus, the sergeant begins to believe that Kim is a big fan of lizard meat. Kwang, in turn, informs that Shin asked to arrange another awakened lizard, and gradually the two begin to understand the plan. Back in the basement, the lieutenant tries to insist aggressively for the cook to bring an appropriate meal, but Shin comments that this attitude is not right, and that if he wants a better meal, he should not behave like that. However, everything is being calculated, and the hero knows well the emptiness the soldier is feeling after days of continuous happiness. Again, the lieutenant tries to order, as the unit officer, for Shin to make his meal, but the hero makes it clear that if the boy's attitude doesn't change, he will simply leave and return only the next day. In this case, Kim changes his plan and decides to beg, saying he will do everything the wants. Thus, Shin agrees to cook, but only with a special condition. Then, without delay, the two go to another hall, which is now the place where the newly awakened are created for Shin. The lieutenant could be the lottery ticket, and despite being obviously scared, the task that Kim would have to do to get the meal was precisely to kill the monster. However, Kim did what was necessary to eat again, and awakened as a level 1 rookie commander. Obviously, the lieutenant was quite scared, and his ability increases all nearby troop stats by 10%, which is a much better percentage increase than the hero imagined. In light of this, Kim asks the young men to explain what all this is, but while he speaks, the hero can only think that he hit the jackpot. There are 2 main ways to improve your stats and increase fixed percentage numbers. Fixed stat increases are more effective if the target has low base stats, while percentage increases have a greater effect the higher the base stats are. Therefore, the lieutenant's talents will be more effective as the troop stats increase, which is great at this moment. The system congratulates the hero for the achievement Irresistible Flavor and, as a reward, gives the boy a dragon heart. Additionally, Shin levels up to level 10 and is promoted from Rookie Chief to Junior Chief level 1. Thus, the protagonist understands that the maximum level is the name, and now the boy's stats increase by 2 per level instead of 1. Moreover, all rookie talents have been replaced by junior talents. Even with rookie abilities, the hero is already at a master level compared to before. Then, Shin wonders how it will be now, since the next batch of battle rations is already complete. In light of all the news, the hero comments that he loves this ability, as the battle rations can create preserved food for emergencies. Although it is less powerful than a normal meal, it has a longer shelf life and is calorie-rich, which will make it easier to feed the troops. For this reason, Shin is surprised once again when thinking about how useful the lieutenant is being. However, now that everything is resolved, it is the survivor's turn. Later, since everyone is already at the location, the person in charge decides to start, but one of the soldiers notices the lieutenant's absence. In response, Shin explains that he is not in a condition to come because of his food, which leaves the others very confused. In any case, the hero asks the military not to worry, as they will rely on Hyung Min Jae, who is the most educated in the unit, but the sergeant knows that Shin is simply trying to push a responsibility onto him, which Shin denies, as they have made it clear that despite being the leader, he will not be the one controlling everything. With that, the sergeant says it's time for them to go to the meeting, and the hero wishes them good luck. In the combined dormitory section, the sergeant enters with his companions and comments that everyone arrived very early. As Hyung and Shin take their seats, a strange atmosphere begins to be felt by the military. Shin knows that there could definitely be someone among them who wants to harm the unit. According to Taijun's instructions, they need to hide their powers. So, the strategy they will adopt in this conversation is to gather as much information from them as possible without revealing anything. Without delay, the responsible sergeant introduces himself as the one who will lead the meeting. And because of this, the girl who requested the meeting questions where the lieutenant is in response. Hyung informs that he said it would be better if they, the ones responsible for the operation, came. And as the girl agrees with a strange reaction, our hero quickly notices the difference. The blonde, in turn, states that he will not be able to communicate with normal soldiers, but Hyung warns that the two are the highest-ranking members in the division. In this case, the survivor asks why it took 3 days to arrange this meeting, and Hyung explains that it was to give some rest time, as well as time to find an ideal representative. And, as usual, everyone there is already very busy with military work. In light of this, the blonde questions whether they are, by any chance, a lower priority than the work, and the sergeant tells him not to think that way. Next, the boy continues arguing, and Shin gets a bit irritated because sometimes people like that, who believe they can do anything, show up. Continuing, the blonde says that Hyung is a soldier and should put people first. But, unable to take it anymore, the girl shouts for Park Kwon-chung to stop, startling everyone. She states that the military also took time out of their schedule to talk to them, and for that reason she tells Park to be quiet. This ends up revealing the group's leader to our hero. Back to the conversation, the girl apologizes for her colleague, and Hyung takes partial blame for realizing that he really took too long to schedule the meeting. In any case, the girl introduces herself as Lee Sang, who was just a clothing store owner before the incident, and the sergeant says he is happy she made it safely to this unit. Getting straight to the point, Hyung asks if she can tell a bit about how she ended up in the unit, and Park agrees to say, understanding that it's important for everyone to know. The Shin, for his part, is quite pleased with his battle brother's performance, and without wasting time, the girl starts explaining that about 2 weeks ago, monsters appeared out of nowhere. At the same time, everyone lost communication like internet, TV, and phone service. At that time, survivors were attacked by all kinds of monsters, and those who were injured but survived turned into zombies. This inevitably left the two soldiers completely shocked by the information. Obviously, the sergeant thinks the survivors are talking about lizards, as they haven't seen any zombies so far. Our hero also finds this unexpected, so the girl asks if there is a problem. Then the sergeant says there's no problem at all, and he makes the excuse that they simply don't use the word zombie. This causes some strangeness among the group members because the monsters are clearly the men in this case. The girl asks how the military calls them, and Hyung thinks quickly to respond that they call them walkers. Shin, for his part, doesn't understand any of this, but the boys in the group remember that name from dramas and understand the reason for the name. They even consider changing the name, but Hyung backtracks, saying that zombie is more accurate, and Lee simply accepts. In light of this, Shin thinks the boy is a bit clumsy, but the plan ended up working. Miss Lee's story began after running a lot to escape the zombies. She joined a group of survivors she stumbled upon, and while they were looking for a safe place to go, a survivor found and told everyone about the military base. That was the gentleman who was there with the others. With that, Kwong decided to ask how the gentleman knew about the location of the unit. Then he said it was a friend of his who worked in construction that told him. He said he had to work at a military base near his town, and all he heard was that there was a base deep in the mountains. The group didn't know exactly where, but since they had to go down, they eventually decided to test it. Because of this, Hyung comments that it must have been a long journey, as everyone went through many dangers, and Shin decides to ask a question, since he couldn't see any weapons with the group besides a metal pipe. In this case, he asked how the survivors managed to escape from the monsters. Then the girl didn't hide it and replied that they managed to awaken powers, which was already obvious to the protagonist, as none of this is possible without awakening. Out of 25 of them, the girl claims she is the only awakened one, and the one who brought everyone there. This is definitely cool information for the protagonist, but he finds it strange to have only one awakened. In case they don't believe her, the girl stands up to demonstrate her worth. With that, she smiles and pulls out 2 pairs of scissors from the back of her coat. Lee explains that these are normal sewing scissors used to fix curtains. Then Shin remembered hearing that the girl worked in a locksmith shop, which is where she got her skills, and without wasting time, the girl presses the scissors against the table and cuts it in half, leaving the sergeant completely impressed and our hero with a familiar feeling. After demonstrating the power of an awakened one, Lee explains that she was working as usual when the monsters invaded. That was a very desperate situation, but the girl managed to grab one of her scissors, and at the moment she was about to be killed, she managed to stab the tip of the scissors into one of the zombies. With that, a blue window appeared, granting superpowers to the girl. And now Lee claims she can decapitate zombies with just one movement with the scissors. In light of this, our hero thinks that the conditions for awakening with the zombies are probably different, and feeling uncertain, he asks why only the girl has awakened, which is also her question. In this case, Shin thinks that being able to kill a zombie is not enough to awaken. Yet still, this whole situation seems very strange. Days ago, Taijun clearly stated that someone would plot against the unit, so our hero cannot believe that Lee is truly the only awakened one in the group. Changing the subject, Hyung asks if the girl has anything to say about awakening, but she doesn't know the exact criteria and, therefore, believes it to be something random. In any case, the sergeant thanks her for the information and offers to help whenever she needs. What our hero interprets differently, but he tries not to focus too much on it. In the end, Shin believes they are not thinking of anything bad because if they were, they would also be putting themselves in danger. Hyung, for his part, says he would also like to explain the current situation of the unit, and the girl thanks him. Then he asks Kwang to clean the table and prepare a leftover, but our hero uses this time to start thinking about a trap outside. Our hero can't stop thinking about these zombies and the other types of monsters that were mentioned. Which means the unit would never know what to expect if it weren't for the visitors. At this moment, two people come running in, informing that the dishes are already washed. In light of this, our hero thanks them, and a girl says it was nothing special because meals need to be paid for in this case. Shin mentions that he has some snacks he just made and invites the two to eat a little. Obviously, they get excited, and to avoid causing problems, he warns that this is a gift for their service. The girl with black hair is the happiest, so Shin informs her that he made it with the leftover ingredients and that therefore, it shouldn't be bad thus. The two see no reason not to try the ice cream. But this ice cream was a special one, with the flavor of happiness from the chef's special sauce. Our hero's plan is to start spreading a rumor about winning prizes when helping with tasks at the barracks. With that, the two take their first bite, and that's already enough to create a commotion. One of them even confessed that she wasn't expecting the ice cream to be so good. However, the other girl finds it strange that her friend is smiling. This is because she hasn't laughed even once since her parents' death, but she explains that suddenly she felt like it. In light of this, the girl with black hair starts to cry upon seeing her friend well. Then the one who smiled tries to comfort the other, saying that this is something to enjoy and not to cry about. Shin, for his part, knows that after losing her parents, many feelings are repressed in the girl. And at the moment, she is acting as if she is happy, but this emotional change is temporary in any case. The effect on the mentality will be felt for a long time after the ability ends, as in Kwang's case. Regardless, the ice cream works, and our hero believes it will be good to try this again. The night after the meeting, Hyung informs that he has the room number of the guy who kept asking about the jobs, and that, apparently, there are 5 people in the room who have known each other since before the outbreak. However, just because they are friends, our hero thinks they may not be accomplices, but Hyung, although agreeing, still believes they might be working together. In this case, the hero asks what they will do now, because they can't just eliminate the boys and continue acting normally, and Hyung agrees, knowing they can't deal with the survivors by staging protests. Moreover, they can't just sit and wait, because if more have awakened, they will be a real threat. Shin comments that he will try to make them eat their meals and admit what they are doing. Changing the subject, the hero remembers that the survivors agreed to clean the rooms and the cafeteria. And, in this case, our hero has the idea to choose one of them to stay in the cafeteria with him. Hyung questions if Shin will do the same thing he did with Kwang and the lieutenant, and he says yes. Seeing that his colleague is quite confident, the sergeant agrees to proceed this way. But he asks if it will be that easy, and wonders if the hero, by any chance, has other skills besides the buffs. This obviously makes the protagonist very uncomfortable for being caught off guard. However, Hyung decides not to pressure his colleague, as sooner or later, the skills will be revealed. However, he asks the hero to be careful, and Shin understands well how he feels because no one would ever eat his food if they knew about the ability. The protagonist will still need to use it sometimes, always paying attention so it isn't detected. In this way, the two decided to choose a date to put their plans into action. In the end, it all happened faster than expected, and, sometime later, the new assistant finishes the work quickly enough to be praised. With that, the hero brings back the previous meal, only this time for the boy, and, the moment he sees it, the man understands that the treat is the famous chef's ice cream. Our hero asks if the rumor has spread, and the man explained that those who tasted it always bragged. In this case, the protagonist apologizes for not offering it to everyone, but the boy understands that the process happens gradually. At the moment he takes the first bite, the man praises the flavor, saying he understands the reaction of others. The hero, for his part, is happy, but to him it was obvious it would be delicious because he put in a lot of effort making it, and what the man is eating is an even more special version that didn't skimp on ingredients. After eating, the boy praised it again and thanked him because it had been a long time since he had eaten something so good. Then our hero decided to start with the questions, and the man agreed to answer what he could. Thus, our hero asks about the reason he questioned him about his work last time, and, without even thinking, the man replied that he needed to confirm if there was awakened, because if there was, he would have to change the strategy. With that, he felt relieved when the chief said there was none. Our hero, for his part, had the feeling that this would happen, and the boy is already talking more than he should. The man's mouth seems to be moving on its own, and this leaves him desperate. Then he asks what they would do if there was an awakened, and the survivor warns that if there were many, they would be discreet and wait for the chance. With that, the protagonist understands but asks if what made them lower their guard was the absence of any awakened, and, again without thinking, he answers yes while asking what the hell is happening to his body. At this moment, he realizes he will be in trouble if he continues and tries to flee, but the protagonist tells him to stop because he still has one more question to ask, and this makes him stop against his will and wait for the other question. Shin asks how many companions the boy has and who the leader is, and, with no choice, the man replies that the group has 5 awakened, with Park as their leader. This immediately reminds the hero, as he is the man who kept complaining about the lieutenant's absence. Shin now questions what the 5 were planning to do together, and the man reveals that they were going to take the unit. After observing for a few days, the group decided that there were no awakened or relevant threats in the place, and therefore they decided to carry out the operation that very night. Obviously, the protagonist is scared by this, but the man just laughs while warning that the operation will start as soon as he returns. In his mind, the hero thinks this can't be happening, but since he heard everything, the man prepares to finish off Shin now. Then, like in a spiral, the survivor invokes his powers, which are of the fire element. At first, the boy was confused because he didn't know what was happening to his body. But now he understood that he had no reason to fear a cook. Shin, for his part, didn't expect his assistant to attack him so suddenly. But now that the plans have been revealed and their identities exposed, the boy feels compelled to finish off the cook. However, as a fireball approaches, the hero warns that the survivor is underestimating the power of a chef. This is because a good cook is well acquainted with fire, and the hero has an ability that encompasses this. With his low affinity for fire, our hero can simply disperse the flames, showing that the boy chose the wrong opponent. In light of this, the man begins to panic, unable to believe that his ability was undone by mere hands. And now the protagonist asserts that there are no more reasons to hide his reality. With the chef's eye, the system indicates all the weak points of the primate in front of him, and first of all, the hero warns that it's better for the boy to prepare. Very irritated, the man asks what this is, but the protagonist doesn't give him time to even think and lunges forward, cutting him with the kitchen knife. Later that same day, the rest of the group is gathered, and everyone finds it strange that Chanyung isn't there yet. Their leader, however, maintains a serious expression, already expecting some bad unforeseen event. After a while, the leader states that they will not wait any longer and will start without Chanyung. However, one of the survivors questions whether they can really do that since the boy is the strongest among them. In response, the blonde shouts that they still have 4 awakened against none on the other side. Although one of the troublemakers still believes they may have been misled in this, Count Chanyung is currently at level 6. And he has an indispensable power for the group with exceptional abilities, but Park, as the head of the group, should not be influenced by that. Thus, he questions whether his colleague will not trust him and comments that the boy will join the formation later. Park is already very irritated, and for that reason he asks everyone to hurry because they will have to bring all the people from the dormitory after everyone arrives at the barracks courtyard. The people start to get annoyed for being brought there in the middle of the night. Lee is also irritated, and for that reason she asks what Park is plotting. But the boy replies that he just likes to lead others. The blonde has always been particularly grumpy and violent, but in front of the girl, he was relatively polite. That's why Lee asked if the blonde wasn't satisfied just being the older brother of the group. And in response, Park stated that a group of 5 people was too small for him, and that the group of survivors was also a bit small, but with the whole unit, then the blonde would be satisfied. In light of this, the girl begins to understand the intentions of her group member, and while the two argue, the other civilians complain a lot about the situation they are in inside the building. The military questions what the survivors are doing outside, and one of them explains that the survivors simply came down and started arguing. But obviously the other soldiers do not like this at all, as they should obey while at the base. Back outside, the girl said she had a feeling that the boys would cause trouble someday. So, feeling she had no choice, she takes her scissors out of her pockets to use force. In response, the civilians become very scared and wonder if those men are crazy to pick a fight like this. But the blonde is not intimidated because he knows very well the power of scissors, and that's why Lee doesn't quite understand what's happening for the boy to think he can handle her with just 4 normal people. But before she could think of anything, the second member of the group appeared, saying he would take care of the girl alone. However, knowing her strength, the leader sent the third one to the fight as well. To help then, Lee realized that everyone was quite confident, even knowing her abilities. And so, she deduced that they were all awakened, which was indeed the case for them. This revelation is quite frightening for the survivors, because they had been deceived all this time. Without waiting any longer, Park shouts that since the girl will not give up, the fight must begin then. Acting strategically, the 2 warriors move towards the normal citizens, and as their leader, the girl steps forward to defend against the attack. At the same moment, the second one appears to provide support and attack with some mysterious golden orbs. But fortunately, Lee manages to cut all of them, despite being quite worried about the level of her opponents. Faced with 2 awakened, the girl begins to question whether she really has any chance. And amidst all the desperate civilians is the leader of the troublemakers, who remains quite confident in overcoming this obstacle. With a powerful punch, the second in command says that the girl is very good at fighting zombies. The other one tells his colleague to stop playing around and start fighting seriously. For Lee, clearly the teamwork of the 2 is poor, and perhaps there is a chance to gain ground in this game. The second, in turn, jumps towards the girl to finish this quickly. The 2 warriors have already reached level 4, and for that reason, he believes there's no way they can lose to a non-combat awakened. But at that moment, a noise is heard throughout the unit, and for a second, everyone stops to see what is happening. This noise was just a warning shot from one of the soldiers, and upon witnessing all this chaos, the commanding leader asks what is happening. Obviously, the 3 who were standing raised their hands without a second thought. The unit representative, in turn, ordered everyone to stop, but Park questioned what would happen if they didn't. In this case, the soldier made it clear that he would open fire, so the blonde just laughs, finding it amusing that a soldier would shoot at civilians in response to the provocation. The soldier warns that this is an exception, as when a threat is found, it must be eliminated. In his thoughts, the boy wonders if this is the leader and realizes there were more than just a few awakened ones hiding the blonde. For his part, calmly states that if they are intimidated, they will have to respond in kind at this moment. The boy is still unsure if the survivors will dare to face armed soldiers. He knows that the awakened are strong, but until now, they are not strong enough to overcome a weapon. As he walks towards the soldiers, Park encourages them to shoot already, and he starts mocking the lack of courage of these young recruits who are only 20 years old. Obviously, the soldiers begin to think that the boy is crazy, so one of them asks leader Seo Sunhyuk to make a decision. Therefore, the boy warned that he clearly made it explicit what would happen, and he pulled the trigger to fulfill his duty. But while everyone looked on in despair, the ammunition did not fire. Park is indeed a bit surprised that Seo tried to shoot, so he retracts what he said about everyone being children. But in the boy's mind, this makes no sense, as the gun was working just a moment ago. With a smile, the blonde explains that the gun is not broken, and that the soldier will understand as soon as he learns about his ability. Park has the job of an arsonist, and one of his abilities is to interfere with the phenomena related to the flames around. Seo obviously is very surprised, and his subordinate warns that the weapons of the rest of the unit are also not functioning. Then the blonde explains that he can interfere with fire, and, since rifles are also firearms that require combustion, they do not work. With so many soldiers around, Seo now understood that the group would not act rashly, having prepared during the conversation, and because of this, the 2 troublemakers praised their older brother quite a bit. However, Lee knows well that if things continue like this, the unit will fall soon. While disarming the soldiers, Park shouts for the whole squad to hear that everyone must kneel. But the soldiers talk among themselves that if the blonde's power is just fire interference, there is no reason to be scared. Therefore, one of them asks Seo what they will do, and the boy responds that, since there are 4 troublemakers, 4 soldiers will be assigned. He suggests using the numerical advantage in this situation, and the leader agrees but with greater support for Lee's side. In light of this, Park warns that the number of normal people does not change anything when fighting an awakened one. But SEO simply ignores the boy and Hanil and Day One to deal with the problem. In this case, Park becomes serious and states that he will kill some soldiers to set an example, starting with the most confident. However, before he even finishes speaking, a fist comes quickly in his direction, and without any chance to defend himself, the blonde receives a solid punch to the face while still conscious. The blonde realizes he was deceived and that there is an awakened one among the soldiers. And, with the leader of the troublemakers down on the ground, everyone is very surprised. Lee also did not expect there to be an awakened one among the soldiers. And since the blonde was knocked out with just one punch, the soldier mocks him, saying that the man is very weak. The second for his part could not understand what made the blonde think he could act like that, and, in light of this, CO admits with surprise that the unit is really getting strong. With this situation resolved, all those who do not need medical attention are released to return to the dormitories. Thus, SEO coordinates the soldiers under his command while the troublemakers are subdued. At this moment, Sergeant Hyung appears running, and SEO reports that nothing serious happened. Regarding the fight among the survivors, SEO warns that there were 5 other awakened ones, besides the young lady, and they not only deceived but also tried to take the unit by force, even though they did not show much danger. Kwang soon notices the blonde who was at the meeting, and in the end it was exactly as the hero predicted, for the 4 ended up making a move without knowing there was a trap. In any case, SEO warns that he couldn't find the 5th one. And about that, the protagonist appears carrying him on his back after carrying the man from far away. Our hero is already tired and is surprised that everything is already resolved. Then he throws the troublemaker to the ground, and Hyung thanks him for the good work. The hero tries to downplay the situation, but the military praises Shin's fighting skills, which are only improving. In light of this, the survivors are obviously scared, as this fallen man was Chan Young, the strongest of the group. Hyung, however, believes the protagonist exaggerated, but our hero warns that he was as gentle as possible. The skill of discerning ingredients starts by cutting the airway and draining the blood, but the downside is that the thirst for blood is too high. Fortunately, the protagonist managed to switch to the preparation of fish lighting, which allowed him to knock out the boy alive. From now on, Shin will be able to subdue humans without killing them, and with everything resolved, Hyung is disappointed with the strength of the troublemakers from everything he has seen so far. Kwang comments that the average level of the group is 3. Meanwhile, the military has about 6 people who have recently awakened at the same level. With that, Kwang comments on Shin's level, which has already surpassed 10, and about the token that is still with each one. Moreover, the statistics have a fixed increase the lower the level, turning a level 1 into a level 5 instantly. It is said that the efficiency will gradually decrease, but in any case our hero thanks the group for their good work. Hyung, however, does not accept taking all the credit, so he says that everyone only got this far because of the protagonist. Interrupting the conversation, Lee brings up the topic of the military also being awakened. Our hero is happy that she is well, and the girl explains that she is only okay thanks to the soldiers' care. Thus, Shin feels relieved, and the girl comments that without the soldiers' help, everyone would be lost. In any case, the hero apologized for keeping everything a secret, but explained that caution was necessary. Lee saw no problem with that and understood very well, so the protagonist also revealed that half of the unit was already awakened in his thoughts. The hero believes it is better to reveal everything now, and for that, he recalls the girl's profession and informs her that he is a chief but also does other jobs on the side. The next day in the basement, Shin asks the soldier on guard if anything is different. Then, the soldier explained that they thought the troublemakers had tried to escape, but from what it seemed, they hadn't even tried. Shin questions where the room is, and the soldier points the way to the room at the end of the hallway. In this case, the hero asks where they should start the interrogation. The soldier asks if his lord will be fine on his own. Then Shin replies that yes, as this is his specialty. Upon entering Mr. Chanjong's room, the boy was very scared, and therefore, the cook warned that he only came to talk. Without delay, the hero warns that he is there because he has some questions, and asks if he will listen. Then, Chanjong kneels, begging for his life and saying he will do whatever is asked. In light of this, Shin is a bit scared thinking that his punch caused such a big trauma. Thus, the hero explains that if the boy listens, he will not be beaten again, but before that, Shin takes out an ice cream and says that Chanjong will have to eat first. After leaving the interrogation, the protagonist is quite pleased with the effects of the confession ice cream. They make the person be frank and honest, and for that reason, the boy confessed that both he and his friends were criminals. It is said that the dispersion of information about awakening made it difficult to expand influence, so the group submitted to the blonde. Then, the criminal hid the fact that he was awakened and joined Miss Lee's group, but taking someone else's power is not an easy task. However, one of the group members was an expert at ruining reputations. In the end, these criminals were quite meticulous and were trying to expand their influence quietly. Chanjong also confesses that this is why the unit was targeted, as, besides being a big fish, it could also provide weapons. Now our hero can understand Taijun's prediction about hiding strength. After all, if they had known the battalion's potential from the beginning, they would have acted more cautiously, expanding gradually. Taking survivors to the unit was a dangerous maneuver, and for that reason the hero wondered what he should do with these people. Later, the lieutenant reports that he reassured the survivors, as requested, and there is nothing more important to comment on, as everyone is already quite calm as expected from an officer. Shin is very pleased to have someone so useful and persuasive under his command. In any case, the lieutenant asks if his performance was good, and the hero confirms that it was in this case. Kim nervously asks for some snacks as a reward. And in light of this, the hero becomes a bit worried about the withdrawal signs that are only getting worse. Not hearing an immediate response, the lieutenant apologizes, saying that 3 meals a day are already enough. But our hero agrees to prepare a snack to reward the soldier's work, which makes him very grateful. With that, the protagonist asks the lieutenant to sit in the dining room, and Kim hops away joyfully like a little child. Witnessing this strange behavior, the hero considers leaving the other 5 criminals in dependency as well. This is because they are just dead weight if left alone, and Shin is also not in the mood to kill human beings. Still, while cooking, he thinks he must take action soon. Later, Shin appears on the blonde screen with a tray full of good food. And upon taking the first bite, that serious and grumpy man smiles like never before. Naturally, the hero does the same with the whole group and receives the achievement of the reform, which is obtained when an evil group is subjected to the power of the kitchen. Additionally, the protagonist receives the title of Reform Cook, which increases the effect of food by 30 for monsters and evil people, so now these former criminals will join the unit as the newest members. The next day, the group salutes the other soldiers and helps with all the day's tasks. In light of this, Shin asks how the newcomers are doing, and Kwang informs him that they are adapting well despite being a bit old. With that, everything seems to be resolved without issues, so the hero states that they will remain as newcomers until the end of the reform. At this moment, Hyung comes running in a panic to talk to Shin, and our hero asks the reason for this. What the sergeant replies is that there is something Shin needs to see immediately. Until then, the unit has already collected all the remaining oil, but without counting the vehicles, the generator will only work for another week. This is quite serious as everyone is running out of food and electricity. However, for the hero, this was inevitable as the arrival of the survivors derailed all original plans. In this case, one of the soldiers asks what they should do, and Shin warns that they will prepare to leave the unit. Later, during the night, Hyung comments that he now understands why the hero asked them not to have dinner. This is because several beautiful and fresh dishes were prepared for the soldiers to suit all tastes. However, at the moment they took their first bite, Shin thought it was good to reveal that it was, in fact, lizard meat, thus turning the boys' excitement into total despair. Obviously, Hyung angrily questions why the hero is cooking lizard meat for them, but the hero explains that, until now, they have only fought against lizards that have weaknesses. However, according to the young lady, there are several monsters outside, including zombies and some humanoid ones. In this case, everyone must be prepared, and Hyung agrees, but he still doesn't understand why they have to eat lizard meat. Therefore, Shin explains that the unit's food supplies are almost gone except for the minimum combat rations. The soldiers can still buy rye bread at the store and thus avoid starving, but this consumes points and is hard to cook. Fortunately, monster meat contains magic and, therefore, becomes quite effective. In the end, what the hero is trying to say is that eating monster meat is the best option. Hyung understands but still states that many will not like this. In particular, lizard meat will be strongly rejected by the soldiers, as they all saw their comrades being killed in battle. And our hero knows this well, which is why he is managing everyone's mental state with meals. Otherwise, the entire unit would have already collapsed under severe trauma, and even so, Shin could barely keep the situation under control. Eating monsters that eat people will surely be something very hard to accept, but Shin stands firm and states that they cannot worry about that now. For, as he has already said before, the main objective of the unit now is survival. Therefore, they must decide whether they will be eaten by monsters or eat them to survive. And Shin seriously asks for the trust of his soldiers. The next day, Hyung called everyone to eat the special meal prepared by the hero. With that, the soldiers began to comment, relieved that they could finally eat something fresh, and some still doubted it was monster meat, but the moment they tasted it, all their conceptions changed, as it was not only better than expected but also boosted their stats. Definitely an incomparable meal to any other they had before. In light of this, Hyung excitedly comments that the plan is a success, and Shin agrees, although some others are still unsure if they will eat or not in this case. The sergeant asks the hero not to worry because he knows everyone will eat sooner or later. By the way, Hyung shouts for everyone to hear that they can't end the party like this, and so the boy asks to bring out the soju and the hidden beer. Soon, Hyung explained that at the end of every department meeting, he always hid some drinks, which got the battalion very excited. With that, the soldiers brought the crates with a good laugh. Military gathering began. Shin was very happy, as it had been a long time since he saw everyone so joyful. Suddenly, Miss Lee appeared in the back, leaving our hero surprised. Then, the girl informed that she hadn't seen soldiers in the living quarters and came here after hearing a noise. Shin, for his part, tries to explain what is happening and says that it is not something they will impose on the survivors. After all, it would be quite problematic if the civilians thought that what is good is going to the soldiers and the bad to the others. Lee, however, had already heard about the monster meat, and although it seemed strange, she could understand. Because something like this is inevitable for survival. But, in any case, the girl has a request to make, and that request is, unexpectedly, to formally include all the survivors in the unit. In light of this, our hero finds it strange that the civilians also want to participate in the fight. But Lee explains that, although it is not bad to be protected, they need to learn to defend themselves for future dangers. This attitude from the girl makes the protagonist very proud, as she is now thinking like a true leader. In any case, Shin says that this is still very sudden. But Lee warns that they have been discussing this since Chang's betrayal, which made a lot of sense to our hero since, if it weren't for their interference, the civilians wouldn't have been able to stop them in this case. The hero asks if the girl considered the opinion of the others. And, in response, she affirms that she did. Therefore, Shin still explains that they are graduated soldiers, which means that upon joining, they will have to follow orders from their superiors, but Lee doesn't mind, as from what she has seen so far, Lieutenant Kim is quite competent to lead them. The only thing the girl didn't know was that Kim was only like that because he was following Shin's orders. But the hero decided to explain that later. Now understanding Lee's request, the hero informs her that he will discuss it with his superiors and report back later. Then, Lee smiles and thanks him, stating that everyone will do their best not to delay the unit. After everything, our hero tells the others about the girl's request, and everyone is left in disbelief. SEO asks if that wouldn't be too much of a burden, as they are already having difficulties at present. However, it is a fact that they cannot simply leave the civilians defenseless to die as soon as they leave. And, in this case, SEO questions whether all the survivors really agreed to this, to which Shin replies that yes, and that they have already agreed to fight in the same war. Certainly, there are many risks involved, and the soldiers cannot predict what dangers lie ahead. However, they must join forces to protect the civilians and survive together. This is because it is their duty as humans and as soldiers, which already makes this debate closed. Later, the girl asks our hero to take a look at what she prepared. And since Lee produced so many military uniforms by herself, the protagonist thinks she was indeed serious. This is a set of military uniforms made from monster leather, with the combat command ones made from the chief's leather, and the others from the regular ones. Lee explains that, as it was mentioned about the lizards having strong defensive power, the girl used that to her advantage. And although the scales are resistant, they are a bit thick, so the girl reinforced only the critical areas. In any case, she asks if our hero wants to try it on, and, upon wearing the outfit, it grants various effects to our hero for being made by a novice tailor. The system says that the outfit greatly increases physical resistance and improves resistance to attributes, and the protagonist thinks this is amazing, especially when used together with the meal boosts. Lee, for her part, praises our hero, who thanks her for being very comfortable. Changing the subject, Shin asks why the girl made the outfit in gray, and in response, she explains that she thought they might go to the city one day, so she decided to make different versions. Moreover, the versions for the officer and the soldier are different, with the leader's version being somewhat more resistant in this case. Shin quickly informs that he is currently the commander of the unit, leaving Lee confused. So, even though it's a bit late, the protagonist decides to tell her everything. Once the girl learns the secrets, she will be fully integrated into the unit. With that, our hero shares everything he knows with the girl, and since only the veterans know, he asks her to keep it a secret. Sometime later, outside the building, the soldiers gathered to check the uniforms. Naturally, they are very happy, as with this type of material it will be much easier to avoid injuries. Everyone seems excited, and the leaders thank the young lady, but she warns that this was only possible with the help of others. As the warriors need more defense, she made it so they could wear armor underneath. For the sword shooters, the girl added pouches for magazine clips. And, for our hero who uses a sword, she added a sheath next to the belt. Lee also reserved those for the lieutenant and for Tae-jun, and our hero offered to deliver them. Changing the subject, the hero suggests that the girl make one of those uniforms for herself as well. This is because she is officially a representative of the survivors, almost like a squad leader. However, she questions whether being a representative of the survivors really means anything after joining the unit, and the protagonist replies that it doesn't, but he warns that they are actually about to leave the unit. To explain, Shin says that when they leave, there will be other survivors looking for refuge. And so, the military will need the girl to take care of those survivors. In this case, the girl understands and is happy to gain such an important position. And blushing, Hyung praises Lee, saying she is great and will do well. Shin, from his own experience, also affirms that the girl will adapt to the role. The hero also felt overwhelmed when he was suddenly appointed as leader, but humans are adaptable creatures. By the way, SEO hands a K5 model pistol to the girl. Normally, it is distributed to field officers or special cases like order officers. When the monsters attacked, this unit lost the battalion commander, as well as the order officer and the military doctor, leaving these pistols without owners. Lee, however, has never handled a weapon like this before, so SEO is tasked with giving a quick lesson. Kwang, for his part, asks who the other two pistols will be for, and Hyung informs that one was given to the lieutenant due to the officer's dignity and because he lacks combat skills. But the battalion commander himself is planning to use the one that remains. Shin explained that he had been using a blade, but it had its limits, and since he is not the combat type, he decided to use the pistol. Kwang, however, did not seem very satisfied with this, but Hyung reassured him, saying that a low-caliber weapon like that wouldn't make a difference for them. A few days later, another soldier managed to awaken, and with 100 awakened, the requirements for forming a guild are completed. The system informs that a guild is a structured society, and therefore positions and rules must be established, which now makes it the best possible time for Shin to leave there. When the suggestion was made to abandon the base and depart, it was as expected. As many showed concern, several soldiers argued that it would be dangerous for normal people to survive in the jungle with so many monsters around. And, even without direct objections, many others were trembling with anxiety. But if they stay locked in the unit, the military will eventually go crazy, and to ensure survival it is necessary to leave. There were also those who understood the situation, like Hyung, who asked what they should do. And for our hero, the only possible choice would be to prepare another meal filled with courage. With all the survivors gathered, the hero thinks that it really is a lot of people, but it also seems appropriate thanks to the protagonist. Everyone is united, and therefore, Hyung suggests they take the next step. There is still much to decide, so the system informs that the leader can appoint deputies to share the functions of the guild. Deputies may be involved in the administration and can communicate remotely via message. The name of the guild, however, has not yet been decided, so the system asks the hero to choose one, and, from what it seems, the military are the first to have a guild, which is not surprising, as gathering 100 awakened ones is very difficult. Moreover, they receive the dragon's tooth as a reward for their achievements. But for now, the hero decides to focus on appointing deputies and giving a name to the guild. With a megaphone, Shin says that, as everyone knows, the guild has grown to 100 awakened members. They are the first in the country, and for that reason the protagonist congratulates everyone. As long as they get stronger, they will advance with confidence, but before leaving the base, there are a few things that need to be organized first. The hero explains that as the guild grows, deputies will be appointed, and among them, there are 5 positions available. Being appointed as a deputy increases the effect of the buff from the emblem skill, and the protagonist makes it clear that he will choose 5 once they are outside. It will be difficult to move with just one group, and that is when they will need subcommanders. Now the lives of the soldiers are at stake, so the appointments must be well thought out. However, as the guild master, the hero can appoint according to his will, but he wants to hear the opinions of others. Fortunately, after much discussion, there was not a significant disagreement within the unit. The senior members that Shin has in mind, including the lady, are indispensable. The biggest problem is Tae-jun due to being in a wheelchair. Because of this, people start to question if there isn't someone better, as, despite the sergeant being a good person, he can barely walk. And for the hero, what the soldiers are saying is understandable. In this case, Shin informs that Sergeant Park Tae-jun will not leave the base. Obviously, the military gets irritated because what was just said was that they would be leaving. Even the seniors were confused, and Hyung questioned Shin. Then, our hero explained that the mountains were the only base of the group, so if all the troops left, they would lose the occupation effect. Moreover, the previous message stated that as long as they maintain territorial control, it would be possible to earn occupation points. And the more they control and for longer, the more they can earn. At the moment, the military still does not know what these points will be used for, but it seems that this game is about territorial battles. Tae-jun, for his part, asks for the megaphone for a minute, and upon receiving it, he informs that, as everyone already knows, his job is as an astronomer. The better the visibility of the stars, the more he can utilize his skills, and few places offer a better view than the base. That's why the boy decided to stay to collect and transmit information, acting as a radar for the unit, and besides him, 7 other soldiers stayed to be part of the detection squad. Thanks to the boy's speech, there were no more objections, and thus the 5 awakened members of the guild were chosen. With that, the new command structure was formed, and most importantly, the name of the guild was also chosen. At first, the soldiers thought of something like Kangwon Liberation Front, but they knew they wouldn't stay only in Kangwon. In this case, another suggested they be the Knights of the Round Table, but his colleague thought Steel Unit sounded better. This is because the first monster they faced was also a steel lizard. But after a long discussion, the name that pleased the most was Steel Legion. Now that they are ready to depart, Hyung asks where they should go, and SEO suggests east and west. In this case, Hyung remembers that the western region has large cities like Chuncheon with a lot of territory. Moreover, there are other military bases in that vast area, but on the other hand, the eastern region of Yeongdong has the unit of superiors and is close to the sea. In this case, the question remains whether they should expand to a larger territory or seek the superior unit, which makes it quite difficult to choose, so Shin has the idea to let Tae-jun decide. A few days later, at the beginning of the night, everyone gathers to leave the unit, and among the subcommanders and their many subordinates is Shin. The day before the unit's departure, the other high-ranking officers were discussing that they had not yet dominated the entire mountain area. Because of this, they prepared a map to assist in the conquest. Hyung, for his part, commented that he thought it would be good to familiarize himself with it before leaving. But Kwang questioned what those parts marked with an X meant. Then, the sergeant explained that these were the places where monsters had been seen recently. And SEO couldn't hide his surprise at knowing there were so many of them, probably considering they still faced some daily. The number must be really high. In the end, the mission was becoming a headache, as instead of decreasing, the number of monsters was only increasing. Moreover, there are recent reports of monsters with bizarre forms beyond the lizards. And without knowing the weaknesses of these monsters, it becomes impossible to deal with them without mercenary-level firepower. In this case, Hyung questioned how the girl got to this unit and if there were any obstacles along the way. Then, she explained that there were monsters, but not as many as were being mentioned now. Throughout the journey, the girl had to deal with only 1 or 2, and they weren't the lizard type, but, since Lee was able to take them out alone, Hyung believes these monsters won't be a problem. In light of this, Shin suggested that this would be the effect of the boss, leaving everyone quite curious. It is a fact that they found survivors 2 days after defeating the boss. It happened that they entered the mountain range just when the number of lizards was much lower than normal. Then, SEO commented, knowing that the conditions were much worse than back then, in addition to having more soldiers and supplies to move. And that's why leaving the unit requires a huge solution, which Hyung agreed with, saying they should prepare as much as possible. Later, the soldiers left the unit with military vehicles. Upon arriving at a designated place, Kwang ordered that perimeter defense be initiated. Another ordered that the vehicles with survivors be sent in first, while some soldiers would cover the rear. By then, everyone was already executing the plan, and Shin stated that, despite it being difficult to maintain formation since they have experience, everything would be fine. This is the classic formation from RPG games with tanks as well as damage dealers and healers. The large vehicles will form barriers in the front and back, with combat warriors positioned closely around. Inside, the long range and support awakened will protect the vehicles transporting survivors. The problem is that they still don't know where the attacks will come from, and besides that, the narrow path makes it hard to escape. The hero states that the plan is to block the attack quickly, but Hyung says the best option is to get out of the mountain quickly using the vehicles. The protagonist understands the concern, as the road in the mountain range is full of unpaved paths. Not to mention that there are cliffs along some parts. It's very dangerous to travel normally, therefore the best option is to leave quickly, but moving like that could lead to the extermination of the entire battalion. With the formation complete, one of the soldiers asks if they should leave now. Minutes later, the vehicles continue to pass along the path, while the soldiers check the perimeter. The survivors stay in the most protected zone, and the commanders outside manage everything via the map. One of the soldiers comments that it is eerily quiet near the base. Then Kwang warns that this will change soon. There is a territorial effect, but a strange noise indicates that this is about to end. The soldier questions, scared, if the sergeant heard it, and Kwang affirms yes and orders the boy to inform the main unit. While the soldiers run out, the lizard monsters also rush in droves, completely surrounding the vehicles. At this moment, all the survivors are inside the vehicles, and therefore Shin orders the military to form up like in the base with a shout. Shin tells the soldiers to focus on the weak points to conserve energy and instructs them not to use rifles because of the noise. Then, the awakened comply with the orders. All the sub-commanders are excited to show what they are capable of, and Shin does not fall behind, joining the confrontation as well. Without wasting time, the monsters charge at the formation, and the military tries to hold their positions without allowing the beasts to pass. With all this commotion, Kwang hears a scream and reacts with a powerful punch to one of the lizards. Quickly, he moves and attacks 2 others, saying that you have to be at least a boss to be in his book. The boy completely takes out the beast with his punches and throws it away. But what he didn't expect was that there would be others, ignoring and using the bodies to climb onto the vehicles. Hyung, for his part, is also not idle and therefore saves a comrade with his electric ability, and he shouts not to rely on the barrier, but rather to push the monsters back to hinder their climbing. During the fight, one awakened defends with a barrier, and another struggles to keep the beasts from getting close to the survivors despite being surrounded. The soldiers are still managing the situation. But on the inside, the survivors can only hear the terrifying sounds of war and tremble in fear. In light of this, Lee remembers that he is there to help and comforts the civilians, saying that the soldiers will definitely win. Outside, the sergeant wraps one of his beams in a black cloak and takes down the beasts in his path, throwing one of them, now lifeless, onto the others who are trying to climb. However, despite achieving this small victory, the war is still far from over, as another swarm is already beginning to approach from afar. In a group even larger than the first, the monsters rush from multiple directions. With this, Hyung questions where they are coming from, but Shin explains that once the battle starts, the noise only attracts them more. Therefore, if the soldiers decided to shoot, they would have already been swept away by a tsunami of lizards. But since they are still distant, Shin orders the elimination of the rest so they can escape soon. In the overall report, all the lizards in the rear have been killed, leaving only 2 in the survivors' area. Then, Shin, from atop one of the vehicles, shouts for the military to use combat actions because a new swarm is on the way. And with that, the military takes the snacks prepared by the commander out of their uniforms. One of the soldiers even felt relieved as he was getting tired. Shin, for his part, also called Hyung, to enjoy the snack because they would soon switch places with Kwang. And after eating, the system informs that all attributes have increased by 5, with the main one being endurance. Thus, our hero draws his kitchen knife from its sheath and asks if the soldiers are all ready while preparing to leave. The hero thought he could no longer use this kitchen. And once outside, creating a suitable environment for cooking would be difficult and dangerous. The smell and smoke would reveal the location to the enemy, and the cooking equipment would be very limited therefore, until they stabilize a solid base at the mountain's base. Everyone would have to rely on combat rations. Still, this amount would not be enough to support the survivors, lasting only for a week, but fortunately, the hero had the combat ration skill, which he acquired upon reaching level 10. Combat rations have lower stats than regular meals, but they also have a long shelf life and optimal caloric density. As everyone was on the move, dehydrated meat would be perfect for its portability. And besides, there was no shortage of lizards, so Shin thought he should eventually be able to turn packaged lunch into combat rations. Back in the present, it is ordered that everyone reposition and that the injured soldiers rotate. Moreover, this needs to be done quickly, and a barricade must be made around the vehicles with the bodies of the lizards. Shin soon orders the team leaders to check their members and report the damage. Then, the hero runs out, telling Hyung that he will be back shortly. The fixed increase in stats and the increase in physical endurance from the jerky are useful, but still not enough. Because of this, Shin went to Lieutenant Kim, which left the officer very surprised. Without much delay, the hero informs that now is the time for Kim to use the commander's skill. But, despite understanding, the lieutenant comments that he is still a bit nervous. In any case, he decides to try, and as he unleashes his power, he shouts for everyone to prepare for battle. This creates a command order and resonates with all the soldiers in the area. The skill temporarily grants allied military the battle-ready effect when fighting in formation with a certain number of allies. Combat efficiency increases, and they become immune to confusion. This increase in strength from the lieutenant raises the allies' attributes by a certain percentage, and it relates to the fixed attribute increase from meals and the courage effect. At this moment, the monsters begin to invade, and therefore all regions start to be monitored. The battle is very difficult, but the military tries to hold on a little longer, confident that they will be able to escape. Each one deals with one or more monsters, but one of them fares worse and receives a precise blow to the abdomen with that. Shin appears from above and drives his knife into the chest of one of the beasts. Then, he continues advancing and attacking all that come into his path. One of them tries to cut our hero in half, but he manages to dodge and counterattack quickly. With this, the protagonist thinks that the buff effect is incredible, and that now they should be able to overcome the crisis safely. But the person who is being praised the most is Lee, and at the moment Shin realizes, he sees that the girl is dealing with 5 at once, so our hero smiled, believing that she must have felt trapped inside the vehicle. But in any case, now was the time to put an end to this. The lizards that are not too damaged, in turn, will be used as food, and a commotion begins in the unit due to some severely injured soldiers. Kwang is taking care of the monsters, so Seo Hyuk is in charge of checking the area. Hyung is tasked with checking the survivors and ensuring a safe route, because the battalion needs to leave before sunset. With that, everyone understands their roles, and the hero puts away the knife for a minute. In total, there are about 10 injured, but fortunately, it seems that everyone can be treated. And, thanks to the hero's meal power, the soldier who was reporting the situation sincerely thanked him. But still, the protagonist knows he has a lot to improve. Shin's skill level is insufficient, so he can only make jerky for now, which is the most primitive form of combat ration. However, the fact that the effects could get better only excites the soldier, who praised him to the point of feeling a bit scared. Moreover, there are over 100 soldiers, and it is said that the effect of the meals increases proportionally with the number of people eating. In any case, the military needs to move soon, so the hero orders the boy to make space in the vehicles for those who cannot move. Now that the issues around there are more or less organized, Shin goes to a car that is having problems, and upon arriving there, the soldiers inform him that they cannot recover the vehicle. In light of this, our hero says it's a shame, but he also asks about the situation of the other vehicles, which, being quite sturdy, the soldiers report are still functioning. In any case, Shin is not very happy because they have barely started, and it's already difficult. Additionally, the soldier warns that they cannot fully trust the vehicles, as they are not armored or tanks and can be destroyed, but at the moment, there is nothing they can do about it, so the ideal now is to find some used materials, And for that reason, the soldiers decide to give up the vehicle to salvage the parts later. Night falls, and with everyone gathered, some people eat while others keep watch for now. The guild deputies join our hero to discuss new strategies based on the map. After a long night, day arrives, and the soldiers continue on their way to the new region. But at this moment, a soldier runs and shouts that Shin needs to see something. Upon seeing this, the hero asks if he found something, and the boy says yes. When they arrive there, Kwang is already investigating, as a part of the metal fence has been completely destroyed. Shin wonders how this happened and if it was the lizards from before then. Kwang agrees that this was the case, but to the hero it doesn't seem like an accident at all in this case. He sees some tire marks and remembers the soldiers who were sent outside clearly. There are signs that a vehicle crashed there, and for that reason Shin asks to bring binoculars immediately. Then, after looking very carefully and focusing on the deepest part of the ravine, the hero finds a military vehicle, which is the same vehicle that Jaemin and Sungo took for the mission. These are signs of a vehicle collision, so our hero tells everyone what he just discovered. And, upon learning that this is where their friends died, the soldiers are quite shocked. Shin, for his part, questioned what the hell happened there. The first lieutenant made a huge mistake by allowing that mission, and even being volunteers, the hero thought he should never have allowed it. At that time, they weren't even awakened, and therefore were defenseless against a monster attack. This made the protagonist think that if the two hadn't gone down the mountain, they would still be alive. The bodies, however, were not being seen, even though the soldiers had died nearby in this case. Kwang suggests that they survived and went somewhere else, but Shin knows that falling from that height would injure even an awakened one, which ends up making our hero think that the two unfortunately became lizard food. Shin truly feels sorry for the two, but now this is the most likely hypothesis of all. The hero continues to have a bad feeling about this, and he keeps sensing that something worse is going to happen, but in any case, Shin knows that the unit doesn't have time for that. Later, Hyung is surprised to find no bodies, and the hero comments that he couldn't understand the reason either. In any case, for now, they need to continue producing combat rations, because there aren't many left, and Hyung agrees, as they now also have a huge stock of lizard meat. In the end, Shin knows he will have to cook on the move. The military cannot be without dried meat within enemy territory. Minutes later, yet another horde of monsters appears from all corners to attack the battalion with great anguish. Hyung orders everyone to hold their positions, because if they leave, they will be finished. But, to the sergeant's misfortune, there are many of them, and this is already suffocating the soldiers. Lee and the other guild deputies are also engaged, but it's unclear if they will hold out. Then, from inside a truck, our hero races against time. As this is already the group's fourth battle, he hasn't had the chance to step out since he was making dried meat, so Shin just hopes everything goes well. Fortunately, the military manages to take care of the monsters, but 5 are injured and 1 is in critical condition. This worries Shin, as they are gradually having more and more casualties. Thanks to the meals and the buff from Lieutenant Kim, the soldier stats have improved, despite the constant fatigue, but all the noise from the fights ends up attracting monsters constantly to the area. Changing the subject, Hyung warns that there are some complaints about Shin, due to the fact that he hasn't been appearing in the fights. The hero can understand the point, but he knows that his combat skills are mediocre compared to the warriors. Therefore, dedicating himself to combat rations is the best he can do. Hyung, for his part, is not part of these criticisms, so he warns that he will silence those fools who are talking too much. But Shin still doesn't know if it will be as easy as the sergeant is saying. Suddenly, a soldier calls the two of them desperately because something strange has appeared on the road, and they quickly decide to check it out without wasting time. The 3 run to a cave, but upon arriving there, everyone is in disbelief at what they see. This is because inside this cave there are 2 soldiers, but in a grotesque zombie form. Shin is surprised that they are still wearing military uniforms, and obviously everyone is scared. But after Kwang looks at the unit tags on their uniforms, the boy realizes that these zombies are Jaemin and Sungo, just the 2 corporals who went on the expedition mission at Lieutenant Kim's orders. Definitely our hero was not expecting this to happen, and in a hurry, Hyung warned that he would give the orders. With a shout, the sergeant orders the soldiers to move forward and bring the survivors into the vehicles. But, looking again through the binoculars, Kwang notices that the zombies are armed and coming towards the unit, leaving the soldiers in complete shock. Apparently, even after death, Jaemin and Sungo's zombies can still handle rifles. Without wasting time, it is ordered that everyone duck to prepare for the interception of the shots. After a lot of commotion, the zombies start firing at the military, who, fortunately, are managing to defend themselves with tactical shields. However, several shots hit the vehicles, and one of them hits Minchiol right in the chest. Our hero is desperate about the situation and warns that he will call a doctor as quickly as possible. However, despite the pain like hell, the boy holds Shin and says that the uniform saved him, which leaves the protagonist very relieved. Obviously, the soldiers ask Shin to check more carefully, and the hero is very satisfied with the quality of the suits even with the chaotic gunfire from the zombies. No fatal injuries were caused, however. The monsters continue to advance, but now unable to shoot anymore. In light of this, the soldiers comment among themselves that the zombies are most likely out of ammunition, and Hyung laughs at the thought that they don't have the intelligence to reload the rifle. In this case, the sergeant orders the squad of warriors to attack before the zombies can do anything. Kwang leads the charge, and two others join the battle, but unexpectedly, the soldiers take down the zombies very easily, and in just a few seconds the situation is completely resolved. However, Kwang still feels a bit bad about having to fight against comrades who have become enemies. At the end of the battle, Shin and Hyung conclude that the situation is resolved, but they are also shaken. However, at that moment, a whole flock of crows took off, flying and screaming as if scared of something. Everyone began to wonder what was happening because the mountain suddenly became restless, and the military could feel the vibrations in the ground. In light of this, Hyung questions if this is what he is thinking, and the hero confirms, as, due to the gunfire, all the monsters are coming. In this case, the sergeant questioned what they should do then, and knowing that the unit has no time to hesitate, the hero warns the battalion that the strategy of moving carefully ends now. With that, the shooters are ordered to prepare alongside the mages, who must remove the restrictions on firepower. At this moment, it is necessary for the unit to use everything they have to survive. For the long-range awakened, Shin sends them to Truck 2. 5 for support. As for the warriors, they are tasked with running at maximum speed and eliminating any monsters that appear. The hero warns that if they can get out of the mountain range, they will have a great chance of survival. This makes everyone rush to their positions as quickly as possible. The hero goes to the driver, who informs that it will take 30 minutes to leave, so Shin warns that he will place a shooter in the passenger seat. With that, all the soldiers except the warriors begin to board the vehicles, and the shooters position themselves on top of them. While everything is getting organized, Shin prepares himself as he is determined to leave this place alive. However, this would be the biggest battle for the unit so far, as, in addition to the lizards, monsters of all types and shapes were approaching. At the moment the monsters arrive, the warriors already begin to face the first ones that appear. And from a distance, the hero shouts not to let the front of the vehicles be blocked. The warriors hold the path ahead, and with a powerful advance, Kwang orders everyone to step back. This is because he made a charge, knocking the monsters down like bowling pins. After defeating them, the boy warns that the vehicle is slowing down, and therefore he asks for help from the other warriors. From atop the vehicles, the shooters are doing their job, and Hyuk asks for more ammunition. In response, the support soldier warns that he will bring it right away, but suddenly he realizes the new horde of monsters descending the ravine. These are wolf monsters, and because of this, the soldiers become cautious due to their frightening appearance. Then, one of the soldiers calls the hero to see what is happening, because these seem stronger than the lizards. And upon encountering that, the protagonist is completely in shock. The monsters have 6 limbs and are so fast that the warriors are having difficulty getting close. Moreover, they really seem very hungry. It is a fact that these are much closer to wild animals compared to the lizards. In this case, the hero questions what they should do because moving the forces with the vehicles will be difficult, but at that same moment, he has an idea. On the front line, the warriors using barriers are doing their utmost to prevent the monsters' advance, and because of the strength of the wolves, one of them warns that he won't be able to hold on for much longer. But before the worst could happen, suddenly several pieces of meat are thrown, and at the moment they pass around the wolves, they divert their attention and grab the food. The fact that the wolves are paying more attention to the lizard meat surprises a soldier. And since they still have plenty of stock, our hero warns that he will continue throwing the meat out. However, the behavior was no different from what the protagonist expected. Initially, the monsters surrounded the group as if they were going to eliminate them, but calmed down as soon as they saw the meat. With that, it becomes clear that they are different from the lizards that plan their attacks properly. If there is food in front of them, the monsters go after it. And if Shin uses this time to discover weak points, the unit can easily win. By analyzing the ingredients, the low-level cooking secret reveals the weakness of the wolves when distracted. They become extremely fragile and disunited. The lizard meat, in turn, is working perfectly as bait. And in the meantime, the shooters finish them off. After some time, the military manages to overcome this new crisis. Then Shin thinks that if they use the lizard meat, they can trick other monsters in the same way. And thanks to this plan, the unit managed to calmly overcome several crises that continued to appear by adding the special sauce to the lizard meat. Shin was able to further enhance the distraction effects. And they also discovered that the higher the quality of the dish, the stronger the effect. After attracting the new monsters with the meat, the hero uses his chef's eye and warns about the weak points to the warriors this time. The weak points of the horde are the legs, and therefore, everyone follows the sergeant's directions. So, once again, the battalion manages to control the situation calmly. Later, the unit continues advancing and some can already see the end of the mountain path. In light of this, some are worried, while others are relieved and, unlike most, Hyung is extremely excited. However, despite also being excited about it, Shin cannot express this. In his mind, the hero thinks that he may have overdone it with his abilities. This is because his eyes are hurting and his head is spinning. So, for the first time, the protagonist feels the sensation of running out of mana and collapses unconscious on the ground, leaving the entire battalion completely desperate about the commander's situation. After some time, our hero wakes up in a bed, after a while sweating cold. And beside him is Hyung, who asks if his colleague is okay. Then Shin replies that he is not and feels like he is dying. But in any case, he asks where they are now. And Hyung explains that they found an empty cabin and decided to set up camp next to it. Getting to the point, the sergeant offers the hero a porridge he made using the combat rations. But the hero realizes that the boy simply threw everything on a tray and boiled it. Hyung, in turn, informs that as soon as they left the mountains, monsters appeared, but the unit managed to handle them in this case. Shin asks if the sergeant remembered to bring the monster bodies, and he confirms that yes, because he already knows that meat and skin are valuable resources. At the moment, Kwang and the others are outside recovering them, and Lee is part of the resource production. Everyone is working hard, and at that moment, a soldier appears to inform that the exploration team has returned. In this case, Hyung asks the hero to continue resting while he takes care of this, but Shin stops him, saying that now it is he who must get up and handle things. Initially, Taejun wanted them to go west because that would be where they would have better luck, but going in that direction seems like a suicide mission for Seo Hyuk, as from what he saw, that place was basically hell. The chaos caused by the monsters attracts even more monsters, and humans killed by them turn into zombies. At this moment, the village is completely filled with zombies and beasts, which is quite bad. In light of this, Shin understands that entering this monster's nest would put them at a huge disadvantage. Moreover, the various buildings and vehicles will limit the unit's visibility, and it won't be easy to move beyond the roads. However, the military still does not give up on going to that area, as Shin suggests they go after strengthening their forces and healing the wounded. Now, the two healers from the guild can barely keep up, and if more people get hurt, the soldiers will die. In this case, Hyuk questions what they will do, and our hero begins to think about it. Then, suddenly, he has the brilliant idea to go to the unit's own barracks, and Hyung agrees right away, knowing they will have many useful resources to collect. Unlike urban areas, the barracks are in an open field and not too far away, making the trip safer. Now that they are in the field, securing a base of operations is crucial, so this is definitely a place that can serve as a base. Finally, our hero suggests that they make a plan before sunset with all the high-ranking members, and in the end, they decided not to take all the troops at once, but rather to split into 3 squads with a captain in each. As it is not possible to use firearms, the shooter will stay in the cabin. Additionally, they need to conserve the ammunition that is already running low, and Hyuk does not disagree. Lee has also been appointed as squad leader, and since she is unsettled with the troops, this is a good opportunity for change. But as she is one of the few who survived in the city, the hero knows they need her for her area knowledge despite many not agreeing. The protagonist also included an awakened survivor in each group, but as they are already completely conditioned, as long as they get a snack afterward, they will do what is necessary. With this, the hero hopes that nothing happens while they are out the next morning. Shin informs that to avoid drawing attention, the groups will be divided and they will meet via different routes. Everyone follows the orders and Shin says they will be leaving now, so the civilians wish good luck to the group after some time walking. Shin decides to ask why the survivors are mostly in the cities, and Lee replies that they had no other choice, as those were the only places where food could be found. The monsters and zombies were very scary, but hunger could be even more so. Lee stated that she has always been very grateful for not missing a day of food at the barracks, as each day before was harder than the last. In any case, Shin also asks if it wasn't difficult to survive in the city, but, recalling what the hero said about the buildings blocking the view, the girl warns that this was not a problem for them. The survivors could hide and move between the structures whenever they encountered danger, which in open fields would obviously not work, and sooner or later, they would be caught. That said, Shin understands that what they considered a disadvantage was, in fact, an advantage for normal people. Changing the subject, the hero asks if there are still people in the city, and Lee replies that probably yes. Although it makes sense, as the military wouldn't be the only survivors, still leaves Shin a bit worried. The reason why they decided to go out to secure resources and grow with new strengths. Just as the first group joined the unit, they need to expand through survival. But if the military starts accepting survivors without any criteria, criminals could infiltrate. And obviously, all of this starts to give our hero quite a headache at one point during the journey. Lee feels something and quickly asks to wait a minute in response. Shin asks what it is. Then the girl warns that she can hear a faint breath nearby, probably coming from zombies. After looking closer, the military realizes that there are indeed zombies there, but fortunately they haven't noticed anyone without the captain. It's a fact that they would be in a bind, especially since the unit still doesn't have much information. Lee explains that most zombies are weaker than the monsters, but sometimes they retain human habits or unpredictable behaviors. One that can be used as an example is the zombie moving inside the sewer. This is because the girl explains that it is hiding to attack anyone who approaches, like a trap. In this case, the hero asks if there is no way to detect them in advance. And the girl explains that, with the hearing of the awakened, it is possible to recognize the breath if one concentrates. With this, Shin understands that hearing is the only method and, therefore, he thinks they need to come up with a strategy soon. Minutes later, the hero explained to the unit everything he had learned, and now, asking for focus, he tells everyone to gather their equipment and weapons in one place, preferring large swords. As things will get complicated if everyone goes together, only the captain and a few others will go with the vanguard group, while the rest will take care of the barracks area with everything ready. The protagonist orders his group to move, and quickly they enter the location. Inside one of the buildings, members are separated into two piles. And, before they advance further, they can hear the sound of the zombies breathing from all directions. A bit worried, Hyung warns that there are many of them and that it's hard to detect their positions. Moreover, Lee comments that she has never seen so many zombies together in her entire life. And, to make matters worse, Shin's former superiors are among the monsters. Understanding that the mission seems very risky, the hero thinks it's better to retreat, and Hyung agrees. But, at the moment the hero was about to order Kwang to go first, a zombie flew towards the boy. It came very close to ending the officer's life, but fortunately, a knife struck the zombie's neck. In response, everyone was very surprised, as the person who had that quick reaction was our hero. With that, Shin shouts for them to leave quickly because the zombies are coming in mass. And while the chase happens, the hero just warns them not to slow down. After all this confusion, fortunately, the group manages to exit the base, but the fact that that zombie is actually Sergeant Park from the battalion draws a lot of attention. So, the hero explains that he knew this zombie and that even with different forms it is still possible to recognize it. Hyung, for his part, knows that, despite everything, they are still the boy's superiors, so there is a great chance that the soldiers will be shaken in a fight. And thinking about it, Shin remembers that it has been a long time since he has had comforting and relaxing meals for his companions since the unit found Jaemin and Sungo on the road. The soldiers' fear of zombies has increased significantly. In this case, Shin said he thought about investigating elsewhere, but decided that they still needed to check the barracks, and all of this is due to the management of mental health, which obviously at first no one understands. The hero explains that the soldiers' fight is temporary, but there may still be survivors who can be saved, and Lee knows that something like this would definitely boost the battalion's morale and encourage Hyung. For his part, still thinks this plan is a bit crazy, but the protagonist explains that, unlike investigating without any objective, the rescue will have a meaningful purpose. The two officers argue quite a bit with our hero, but in any case, they decide to listen to the plan. Then, the military continued discussing strategy to face the monsters at the barracks. However, since these buildings are basically dungeons, the hero knew it wouldn't be easy at all. In this case, Hyung suggested bringing all the mages to bring down the place with maximum firepower. And unexpectedly, our hero decided to consider this option, but only as plan B. But, before explaining plan A, Shin called the boys to eat a bit of food first while cooking. The protagonist thinks that their combat power is not inferior to that of the zombies. But a simple increase in statistics won't help in this situation, and that's why what is being cooked is alivore ears. It is said that they help determine the location of predators and prey, so it should help understand the zombies. Additionally, the hero infused calm emotions into the meal, and since the dish was made with magical ingredients, it contains amplified effects. Sometime later, the soldiers begin to eat and are quite happy that it tastes exactly like pork neck. All the soldiers' statistics increase by 5 and the hearing magic is activated. One of them draws everyone's attention to see a strange feature in the status window, but the others are annoyed by him shouting, and then they soon realize that no one is shouting. Temporarily, the soldiers acquired sensitive hearing, and before this could cause a fight, Shin understood it was time to leave. Running wildly through the city, the soldiers can hear the noise of the zombies before they arrive. And thus, they intercept the monsters with powerful attacks, not giving them a chance to defend themselves. One of the soldiers shouts warning that there is another in the wardrobe, and another asks him to be quiet. Now the soldiers can determine the enemy's location just by sound. Lee even finds it hard to believe, but there is the downside of their ears hurting quite a bit in this case. The hero thinks that the brain functions must not be prepared for enhanced hearing. But since they are just zombies, simply locating them will keep the unit safe, and at this pace they will finish quickly. Suddenly, a zombie appears without anyone noticing, but fortunately, the protagonist manages to defend against the advance, stabbing a knife into the monster's head and making it fall lifeless to the ground. Unexpectedly, some zombies are starting to attack silently, so Shin thinks they have been there too long. With his order, the hero tells the group to move to the officers' building on the next floor. And if all goes well, the unit should be able to complete the mission without problems. Upon reaching the other floor, the hero is surprised to find Hyung already there. Then, the boy informs that the protagonist is late, and Kwang reports that they have taken care of most of the monsters at this pace. The soldier says he almost feels sorry for the zombies because they have no combat skills, but there is still one left, who is the commander of the unit. Major Kwak. Hanjong Shin is obviously very scared to see the highest-ranking person in the unit like this. Kwak was different from the indecisive Lieutenant Kim, being a soldier among soldiers, and everyone recognized his skill as the commander. Thus, the hero informs that he wants to personally say goodbye to the battalion commander. And everyone agrees because, as the guildmaster of the Steel Legion, it is Shin's responsibility to resolve this. Although a bit worried, the hero draws his blade and begins to approach the monster. Then, a fight between the two begins, with the major taking the initiative in the attacks. Shin can perceive that his spirit is definitely different from the other zombies. But still, the hero manages to finish him off very easily in just one move. Even in a situation like this, the hero thinks he will never forget the military spirit that the commander showed them. Thus, as he decapitates the monster, he commits to building this guild under his command, and to transform it into a powerful organization, protecting it at all costs. Later, along with all the soldiers present, the unit holds a burial ceremony for their fallen comrades. With all the zombie bodies together, the fire cremated the monsters, and everyone felt great sadness. This is because all those who died were excellent soldiers and excellent friends. Then, our hero bids farewell to his companions, wishing that they rest in peace, and, since they have already held the funeral, he advises the others to focus on those who survived from now on. After they finish the farewell, the work to transform the officers' quarters into the new temporary base truly began. The group led by Hyung was tasked with completely erasing any trace of zombies in the place. Meanwhile, the survivors led by Lee went to fetch water from the stream near the accommodations. As for Kwang's group, they went to gather wood and light torches before sunset. And finally, our hero discussed with Seo Hyuk about needing to create a defensive perimeter similar to the base as shown on the map, ensuring the line of sight for the mages and shooters is the highest priority, so they decide to start immediately. Later, Shin mentions that he would like to throw a party like they did before leaving the base, but it won't be possible yet. He turns and knows that everyone is disappointed and understands that leisure is necessary. But the important part starts now, and the military needs to decide the next destination for the guild. In this case, Hyung touches the hero's shoulder to take care of that part. He states that, as everyone already knows, the battalion came there to expand. But for now, they have no resources even to survive. Therefore, the boy put together a list showing everything the unit needs at this moment. One of the soldiers, however, has a question, and it's about the lack of food because since they arrived, they have collected a lot of meat. Clearly, the boy is right, but just meat is not enough to nourish a body. Shin, for his part, is unsure how powerful his mana is, which appears in the bodies of the awakened. But it is uncertain whether it can maintain health even with the lack of nutrients. In this case, Hyung warns that they will be fine eating meat for a month, but there's no way to know what will happen afterward. That's not all, as they are also out of fuel and ammunition which they need for obvious reasons. Thus, Hyung warns that this is the time to present ideas to solve the problems, and then Corporal Lee Gangwoo raises his hand because he has an opinion on what to do, but he suggests that the military needs to secure more crafting materials. This enters the discussion in a somewhat confusing way, and that's why Kwang asks for the reason. In any case, the corporal continues to hold his opinion, as he is sure it will help. Thinking about this, our hero also wanted to collect some materials in the past because of the vehicles. And, for Shin, if they had resources, they could clearly have done something about those that were thrown away. Given this, knowing that the corporal's job is combat engineer, the hero tells him to go out and explain to the rest of the group. Gangwoo's argument was quite persuasive, but the problem is that gasoline and food are still more important. But the idea of securing materials that are easy to obtain to continue moving safely is also great. What is being discussed is about manufacturing and modifying war machines. Vehicles that will not be overloaded by monsters can have some enhancements, like thorn barriers. And Hyung agrees because if the vehicles were reinforced, they really wouldn't need to move so cautiously. In this case, Shin questions whether a combat engineer can make this type of modification, and the corporal replies that, with enough time, yes. In a way, combat engineers also do this type of production, which is exactly the concept of putting armor on vehicles, and, if Shin's prediction is correct, production works are stronger than expected in this game. In any case, the hero warns that he will reject it if the corporal is just trying to test his skills. But Gangwoo stands by his word, believing that this is the most important thing at the moment. Thus, the protagonist says that it is already enough and asks the corporal to give his best. Now, other things are also important, but Shin was convinced that this was the priority. So, at the end of the day's activities, the hero comments that he will inform them about what they decided later, and everyone is dismissed to sleep. Later, Shin lights a fire to cook and believes he will have to ask the others to help set the tables. The kitchen in the barracks is useless without electricity and water, but this makeshift setup isn't too bad for them to have dinner. Thus, Shin decides to start with the fat-filled monster he collected. But despite being edible, the smell of it cooking is unbearable. This is animal fat mixed with mana, and when used in cooking it adapts to the mana of the dish. For the hero, the ingredient is the most powerful in the culinary world because it makes anything delicious when fried. Then the ingredient is ready, which is simply the famous cooking oil. In a meeting, Gangwoo informs that there is a large hardware warehouse near the police quarters. So Hyung questions how the corporal knows this. The boy explained that sometimes the base urgently needed crafting materials, so that was where he came. Thus, Hyung asks if what the soldier is suggesting is to receive materials from there, and Gangwoo says yes because, as it is a spacious place, it should have most of the materials they need. This place is near the barracks but a bit far from urban areas. And Shin thinks they should also have fewer zombies. In this case, Hyung feels proud of the corporal, and both he and Shin believe it is a good opportunity. Therefore, the hero tells Kwang to prepare the troops because they will advance with the same teams, but with a combat engineer in each. Additionally, Gangwoo is tasked with bringing a vehicle in good condition to the front of the quarters. Hyung questions the danger of driving, but the protagonist warns that there is no other choice. This is because they need to move the supplies, but Shin assures that they will move with the utmost care. Later problems begin, and the hero asks how many injured they have. Then it is reported that there are 3, and that fortunately no one is in serious condition. Since they are out of danger, Shin tells the boy to focus on treatment and Kwang to ensure the safety of the path at the moment. The soldiers are at full speed, and Gongwu keeps stepping on the accelerator. The guild managed to minimize the noise of the combat as much as possible. But they couldn't foresee all this damage. As expected, traveling on the roads is still dangerous. But generally, the monsters compete with each other for prey. Which, unfortunately, is completely different from the zombies, who walk as if avoiding altered food with the same formation as before. The warriors clear the way for the truck. And upon arriving there, the soldiers realize that the warehouse is indeed huge. The interior, however, is probably empty, and Shin thinks it's good to start moving soon. Thus, he orders Lee's team to secure the entrance of the warehouse. The combat engineers will explain to the soldiers what supplies they need, and the others would just do the manual labor, which began with a shout of advance from the hero. But, unexpectedly, upon reaching the entrance of the place, everyone was surprised because the warehouse was a mess. In light of this, Shin told the others not to worry about it because they just needed to grab the materials and leave. Thus, it is also ordered that the soldiers keep the entrance clear to be able to take things to the truck first. The steel plates are taken, and since many of them are on the ground, extra care must be taken to carry them. However, while the soldiers were organizing things, a strange sound was heard by everyone. Both the combat engineer and the others managed to hear it. And, as the sound indicated that there was something in the warehouse, Shin ordered everyone to prepare for battle with that. The soldiers drew their weapons and rushed into battle. But suddenly, the metal plates began to move and everyone was very scared by this, because there is a black energy swirling behind the warehouse, sucking in the metal plates. Then, little by little, they begin to come together and take the shape of something much larger, revealing that, in the end, it was actually a huge monster that was hidden. The beast roars, and just the resonating wind is enough for the soldiers to understand that the monster is incredibly strong. Both Kwang and the others have never seen a monster like this before, and thus the sergeants are frightened. But, having gone through so much until now, the hero believes in victory, thus sending the soldiers to their battle positions with all the force of that roar. The warehouse windows shatter, and Lee, who is part of the gate guard, cannot remain inactive. While running, she only wonders how big this monster is, but when she sees it, she realizes it is even worse than she imagined. With just one blow, the monster manages to defeat 5 soldiers, and for that, Hyung shouts to use the jerky. Kwang, in turn, is in a direct confrontation, but since the beast's body is made of iron plates, the attacks do not work. With one attack after another, the beast continues to brutally defeat the soldiers, and even the buffs from our hero's meals are not helping the soldiers at all. In the end, the monster was much stronger than Shin could imagine. Without wasting time, the beast continues to attack from all directions, causing tremors in the ground, and as the soldiers are flying, the hero understands that at this rate, they will be annihilated. That's why Shin decides to use the monster bait, because it worked well when they were descending the mountain. But at the moment he throws it towards the monster, he simply discards all the dried meats. Completely in shock, the hero questions what happened and if perhaps the food did not please the monster, but Hyung quickly warns that they won't be able to handle this and that they need to retreat now. Then, our hero agrees and tells everyone to leave slowly to avoid an attack from behind. Moreover, the injured were a priority to get into the vehicle, and while fleeing, our hero thought about making this monster regret wasting so much of his food. Fortunately, the monster cannot chase the soldiers, so this is probably its territory, but still, the soldiers have quite a problem and need to return as quickly as possible. Back at the camp, one of them suggests leaving the matter of collecting materials aside. This is because it is not worth the risk of sacrificing several soldiers for something like that. Kwang also agrees, but he asks if the hero managed to identify any weakness in the monster. And the protagonist says yes, but this time taking it down will be much more difficult. In any case, Lee asks what the visible weakness is. What the system indicated was that the beast used metal plates to protect its abdomen, which is more fragile than the rest of its body. Therefore, they need to remove the iron covering the weakness to access the dark core. However, what was said was correct because the materials were not that necessary and could be found elsewhere. Despite this, Shin is quite irritated with this situation, as the monster did not eat his meats even though it is a carnivorous type. Since the beast is a living organism, it must eat something, but the hero still does not understand the reason for that rejection. Then, the corporal suggests that what the monster eats could be the metal itself. And, not understanding at first, the others ask him to explain further. Thus, The boy pointed out that there were bite marks on the scattered pieces of metal. And, very surprised, the commanders asked if the soldier was really sure. Therefore, the boy replied that engineers have a way of identifying alterations in parts, and those were not due to rust, but still, Hyung cannot understand how a monster feeds on iron. However, at that moment our hero already has an idea to solve this problem since he still has leftover oil. Shin asks if it wouldn't be a good idea to fry the metal plates, but obviously, the others find it strange that something like that would make the taste good in any case. They cannot defeat the beast in a direct confrontation, and need to try something before returning. In this case, the corporal agrees, as the more methods they try to make the monster eat, the better. Thus, the plan is decided, and Shin already orders them to bring a metal plate in good condition. Later, our hero tries to cook the material, and, while the iron fries, he fills with rage remembering what the beast did. Then, the system appears informing that the plate was mixed with magic, and with the cook's feeling of defeat moreover, Shin becomes the first human to discover a new frontier in the world of gastronomy. It is said that even the most renowned chefs rarely attempt to cook something different, and many die without trying to reach a new level. But not our hero, as he now also receives a pioneer reward, which is something called overcoming the limits of ingredients, and leaves Shin very surprised with the corporal's material identification skill. He warns that the iron plate did not become stronger, but rather that the efficiency of the material really decreased to an almost unusable level. Therefore, this will not strengthen the iron plate as the hero thought. And if the monster likes this, Hyung thinks the plan did not work, but unexpectedly Gongwoo disagrees, saying that this is, in fact, an incredible achievement for him. The act of frying the metal in oil and the material changing entirely is almost miraculous. Then, thinking better, the sergeant agrees, and Shin comments that he should not keep playing at cooking. Suddenly, one of the soldiers appears to inform that they are ready to move out. Therefore, our hero decides to start the operation. Most of the soldiers do not know that the boy's meals can alter emotions, since it is not the best decision to have his power publicly known. Regarding the changed iron plate, Shin will consider it just a debuff for now, and this time, that monster will definitely not be able to resist. Back in the warehouse, the iron plates begin to move again. The first time, the soldiers were confused by the mess, but it seems the monster covers itself with things to take shape, and it only does this when the enemy approaches, so everyone stays quite alert. Right in the middle of the metal plates is the center, which is the dark shadow protected by metal plates. Therefore, without wasting time, the protagonist throws the crispy iron plate towards the beast, and suddenly it stops being attracted and falls to the ground, leaving everyone quite confused. But soon the monster opened a space and began to suck the metal into the core, leaving Shin surprised that it was easier than expected. Thus, the hero hopes the monster enjoys its meal. And outside, from the group responsible for the guard, Lee finds this entire silence strange. Inside, however, all the armor of the beast is undone, so it can enjoy its meal. And despite the plan working, everyone still finds the monster's true form quite cute. However, Hyung still asks why the hero is so calm, so Shin explains that the special effect of the dish is defeat. At this moment, the monster is just a weak creature trembling under the weight of defeat. Thus, Hyung is quite satisfied with the plan, and Shin decides to end this quickly. But not before the corporal appears, saying that the sergeant needs to see something urgently. Gongwoo brings the boys to a different iron plate and, analyzing it with his chief's eye, the system warns that the iron plate from the Mac monster is reinforced with magic, and despite its high quality, is not recommended as an ingredient due to hygiene. But this information alone is enough to impress Shin, because the system detected the plate as an ingredient in any case. The corporal warns that this is not a common metal plate, because it has been reinforced with the monster's magic. Hyung then understands why the attacks weren't working, and Gongwoo finds it very interesting that the effects remain after leaving the beast. The reinforced iron blade could be quite useful for the military, and thus the corporal asks if there is a way to keep the monster alive. Logically, everyone cannot agree to simply leave the monster alone, and the protagonist, while understanding the point, also agrees that something like this is very dangerous. At the moment, the beast is calm, but they do not know when it might try to attack again. However, Gongwoo does not give up and warns that it is possible to use this characteristic to create something amazing. Thus, Shin wonders what he should do, and the corporal suggests they keep the monster in a safe place so they don't lose these materials. In this case, Hyung asks what our hero thinks about this and if he is willing to give up this opportunity. and making Gongwu very happy with the answer, he says he will not let it pass. Thus, the military gets excited and decides to try, and in a few seconds the monster is placed inside a cage. Then, Shin warns that Mac will stay there from now on, and that there is no piece of metal nearby, which makes the monster furious. At another moment, the engineers analyze the metals obtained from the monster and realize that it is much stronger than normal. Obviously, they are very excited, and our hero thinks this is great. Gongwu, for his part, thanks them for trusting them and prioritizing the acquisition of materials. Then, since his work there is done, Shin lets the corporal proceed with the plan and do his best amid the construction. The system identifies several low-level kitchen materials, and Shin gets excited that, once again, is being shown as possible ingredients. If the engineer's identification trait only works on materials, our hero's is superior and limitless. Thus, he thinks that if used together with the chief's eye that identifies weaknesses, they can handle any monster that appears. A few days later, the modifications are finally completed, and Gongwu asks what the superiors thought. But the result was so impressive that everyone was left speechless, as the truck even has horns. One of the soldiers compares it to something out of a Mad Max movie. However, despite the design being strange, the engineer assures that it will work well, and Shin sees no problem with that. Getting straight to the point, the corporal warns that the vehicle can be used for driving and combat, and that the spikes on the side can easily destroy monsters. Except for the last steel monster they encountered recently, which our protagonist understands. In any case, the engineer asks to think of the truck both as a barricade and as a tank. Moreover, with an acoustic insulator they will reduce the noise, and Shin is very happy with how things are going. Changing the subject, Hyung asks how Mac is doing, and the sergeant informs that he is fine. For now, the boy is monitoring while feeding him, and he doesn't seem to transform with just a few metal plates nearby. Additionally, the iron plates he eats are reinforced with magic, which is great for the guild, so it seems that whenever a metal plate is given to the monster, he reinforces it at this moment. The reinforcement process is slow, but the engineers are trying to improve it to, who knows, one day build a wall. And while the hero is worried, Hyung thinks it's a good idea. Later, the commanders look for a convenience store and find it practically at the border. In this case, Lee suggests sending the new vehicle there, but Shin warns that they will need supplies. However, Hyung knows they can't just stay there because they need to try something. And Lee is the first to agree, even though she is still not sure if they will find anything useful. That's because, although it's not a well-known store, the people living nearby would have continued to use it. But still, Hyung wishes to go in hopes that the place isn't completely empty, and since it's close, Shin understands that this might not be a bad idea and agrees to prepare and head out. In front of the convenience store, everyone is impressed with the truck's performance. The first attempt was very smooth, and the vehicle really tears most monsters to pieces, but still, the military will have to clean up all the blood and flesh, and the sergeant confesses he didn't think about the cleanup. Shin, for his part, asks them to stay focused and to eat military ration number 3. And while the military cheers, the hero thinks it's quite convenient to label numbers based on the dish's effect. This jerky has the effect of sensitive hearing, so the military enters the store quite alert, and as the group split up, each begins to search for supplies on the shelves. But unfortunately, they find nothing. However, just to be cautious, the hero decides to look a bit more. At this moment, a soldier catches the sergeant's attention, reporting a zombie corpse there, and the condition of the wound was as if it had been struck in the head by an axe. Therefore, it seems that some survivor in the area took care of this, but suddenly, a strange sound is heard by everyone, startling the whole group quickly. Shin tells his colleagues not to move. And, paying close attention to his surroundings, the hero realizes there is something inside the market. Definitely, the sound is coming from inside the place where the butcher is. And it's noticeable that the sound is being muffled, as if someone is trying to hide their presence. In this case, the unit approaches, already thinking it might be a type of monster that ambushes its prey. Then, Kwang uses all his strength and breaks down the gate, completely destroying it. Behind, our hero also advances and uses his chief's eye. Because, even if he doesn't know what kind of monster it is, if he discovers the weakness, he can defeat it. It would be like a piece of meat that was prepared to be cut, or a dish that would be ready to be cooked, but unexpectedly, what the system identifies is just the presence of a human. So, with no way to escape, the person appears, revealing herself to be a girl trying to protect her younger brother in the past. a group of survivors arrived with supplies at this market. But, unable to carry more, they thought it was a waste. In light of this, a woman warned them to leave soon because it was dangerous to stay there. And, although they had already filled their backpacks with everything they could, one of them suggested hiding the rest. However, the girl was more concerned about leaving quickly, as they could come back later. Thus, the two men were a bit disappointed, and one of them called Suyin and her brother to leave. However, just when they were about to leave, something appeared, destroying everything and causing massive damage. Some of the men were cut, and others were thrown away. Then, the one with the ponytail ran and shouted for Suyin to flee, warning about the strange creature that appeared. Initially, both the girl and her brother didn't understand, and the man kept insisting that they flee immediately, but, before he could explain the situation better, the creature tore him apart right in front of the two. And faced with this shock, Suyin grabbed her brother by the arm and ran without even looking back. So, while all of her companions were killed by the monster, the girl remained hidden with her brother, trying not to make any noise.